Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back talking about the latest season of Australian Survivor, where I'll be doing my review for Australian Survivor Titans vs. Rebels, a season that straight up had no right to be as good as it was. I mean, coming into this season, I had very low expectations. Before even the season came out, we had articles talking about how much production did not like this season, how much they did not enjoy the filming process of this season, how it was claimed that there were no big characters and that this was a letdown after Heroes vs. Villains. Yet, this season ended up being a really strong season, much better than I ever expected it to be. Again, having a really strong cast, probably one of the most consistent all-around casts in the history of the show, and mixing that in some very hectic gameplay, very little of it good, but at least people playing the game extremely hard. It led to this being a very entertaining season, despite the typical drawbacks that come with Australian Survivor. But with that, obviously, I'll still be running through the season from beginning to end, talking about my thoughts along the way. But let's start off with the premiere, where we start off with the typical cinematic shots of the shore, followed by us spoiling the previous season, because that's what Australian Survivor does. But we do learn that there will be 24 brand new players here, where this is something that we had learned after Heroes vs. Villains, that production had a tough time finding returning players for that season, to where they had talked about how they needed to increase their pool of players in the lead up to the next returnee seasons, and this being a cast full of newbies is not entirely shocking, but here we do learn that the tribes will be divided into two opposing forces by their way of life, those on top of the game and those who play their own game, again leading us to the Titans vs. Rebels theme, which is kind of dumb. I mean, it's a theme that is just strange, as it's not like these are two directly opposing forces. It's not this like commonly talked about dichotomy in society, where again this title just kind of comes out of nowhere. Now, I mean, at the end of the day, it's essentially just a glorified champions versus contenders, just them trying to find another name around it. But at the end of the day, I mean, the theme doesn't really matter that much, and it's obviously the start of what makes Australian Survivor at this point the complete opposite of Survivor US. It doing a lot of the things that Survivor US used to do, but then just doesn't anymore. Obviously, these really kooky themes mixed in with us having these two tribes, two larger tribes, that allows for more dynamics on those respective tribes, which all felt, again, refreshing after coming from the new era of Survivor US. But here we do get the Titans title card, where we first get introduced to Viola, talking about how she's a winner, not just an average girl, and that she's Queen V, address me as such, and just all around, like, Viola definitely comes off as a massive character right away, one that I was very much expecting to have a lot of longevity on this season, which made her eventual elimination that much more shocking. We also get introduced to Charles, which was kind of random, as Charles is such an irrelevant character on this season, where I find it strange they introduced him in the intro. We then get an introduction to Valeria, who talks about being a model and people thinking that she's a dumb bimbo, but it works for her, and that there's a sleeping bear inside of her ready to fight, which was all strong content there. Also getting introduced to Mark, where he talks about people see him as a normal dude, but he can influence other people as a diplomat, where, like, straight up, Mark is someone that coming into this season I had no real hopes for. I thought he was someone that was going to be perceived as openly scheming at the very beginning, and again, surprisingly, he ends up not being looked at that way, and actually ends up playing a pretty strong early game, only for him to completely tank his game following that. But again, despite that, the edit always seems to be on his side. It always shows him positively in making these moves, and either way, it's like he always just screamed out someone that was set up for longevity on this season. Either way, we then cut to the Rebels, who are ready to break the rules, where we see them coming in boats that ride around the big boat that the Titans are on, and we see them taunting them, I guess. Again, very strange. Again, we learn that rebels are mavericks, thrill seekers, outsiders, and underdogs. To start all off, the first rebel we get introduced to is Garrick, a loss prevention officer that stops thieves, aka kind of the opposite of a rebel. But we also get introduced to PETA, who was obviously my winner pick and ends up being a pretty bad one at that, but it does end up actually having a pretty decent intro, though probably did have a major red flag right at the beginning of saying that people typically look at her and run in the other direction, which is, again, not a great look. Well, we then also get introduced to Kelly, who talks about being a psychologist somehow, and talks about how she's going to lie about her job because that definitely would have mattered. And again, obviously Kelly is just this insane character on this season right from the beginning. But then we get to Ferris, who gets a really strange intro here, talking about how people think of him as a big dumb Arab when he's the opposite, which is like, I don't know if that's ever the impression I would have gotten from Ferris. Along the fact that he also talks about how George is the closest to an Arab that we've gotten on TV, and he's going to bring it home for the both of them, which, I mean, it's a strong opening confessional, but it's also like strange. Like, why is George the closest to an Arab? But either way, and right before the challenge, we do get a couple shorter intros from the likes of Nathan and Raymond, both of which ending up being pretty superfluous, with Raymond's edit in particular being extremely strange, considering he gets an intro here only for him to be under-edited for a lot of the season, in a point where, like, again, he seemed like a really big character, so it's just bizarre that they did under-edit him in that way. But anyway, we get to the first challenge, to where they're coming in from the shore, which makes you question when they get off the boat. But anyway, the challenge ends up being a pretty typical opening challenge here of having to create a fire. That'll light up a wicker man. They have the race out to a pontoon to get firewood, and there's this dilemma of how much firewood to get. And we do see JLP really hamming up the Titans versus Rebels theme right away, and talking about how, the Titans are creating an assembly line, but they have too many leaders and it leads to confusion, while the Rebels go individually and take the lead. We already see Nathan being the first to get fire, though ends up going for it, despite the fact that their structure had not been finished yet, leading to the Rebels winning instead. To where we do see Tobias making an L sign on his forehead to the Titans when they lose, because that's obviously a smart way of playing this game. There's the camp life. I mean, the Rebel Tribe did not get that much content in this episode, with obviously Titans getting a major highlight really for the first 2 episodes of the season, where we do get an introduction to Alex, with him being introduced as a Rebel teacher and him talking about his opinions of the tribe in a similar way to how Haley and Mark had in the past, which was pretty good content for him off the bat, to where I did have him as a top contender, only for that to dissipate by episode 3. But he does mention here his annoyances with how loud Kelly is, which ends up blossoming into this really bizarre dynamic that we see moving forward. We do see Ferris talking about having a horrible first night, flashing back to 12 a.m. at night, to where we see Kelly being really loud and annoying her entire tribe. While we do also get set up to the Tobias, Sarah, Alex, and PETA alliance, with them cuddling up, making it pretty clear there were going to be alliance down the road. But really the rest of the content for the episode ends up happening on the Titans tribe, where here we do get Eden getting a major focus here. Him getting the Haley/Mark content for the tribe, of him talking about his initial impressions, along with him also getting an intro package, talking about how he's going to have a great social game because he has the vastest understanding of pop culture and will create instant bonds with that, which, I mean, I guess. But Eden does end up having a really strong early edit on this season, which is strange considering how inconsistent his edit is post week 1. But anyway, we do see it pouring rain, where Valeria talks about her looking like a wet chicken and it ruined her cute look, which is a funny confessional. But it does lead to her saying that she's found the love of her life. That person is Viola. Obviously setting up their relationship, which very much seemed like an important relationship for down the road, along with the fact that we also see her relationship with Mark as well, implying their importance to the story. But then we finally get focus on Frankie, who does get her intro package here, talking about how in real life she would relegate and how she runs her own salon, really trying to show her off as a pretty powerful player, leading to her bonding with Nate, to where we do see them trying to form the initial majority alliance, saying that they want to work with Val and Jaden as they're strong, but also talking about having to need to pull in some weaker people like Eden, Caroline, and Mark. And they do say that weak kids get killed first, where we then get introduced to Jess, who has a humorous opening confessional, saying that she thought it would be easy lemon squeezy, but instead it's stress, depressed, and lemon zest. But she clearly ends up coming off as a fish out of water here, where she obviously becomes the decoy target for the episode. And we do see her talking to Nathan, and really putting her foot in her mouth by mentioning that she wants to target stronger girls like Frankie, which obviously Nathan relays back to her, with Frankie securing the vote onto Jess, which made it clear it wasn't going to happen, as this is still all before the immunity challenge. But we get to the immunity challenge, where who would have guessed it? It's a pretty typical obstacle course challenge, but we do get the Titans really struggling for the majority of it, them even forgetting their ball at a point, and JLP again really hyping it up as, no one wants to do the grunt work on the Titans tribe. Finally, despite that, we do see the Titans actually get back in the lead, only from the waste that opportunity anyway, with them having all the women be the one to lift the balls, which seemed like a bad decision. Also them getting their rope twisted, to where the Rebels end up winning immunity anyway. And again, in the lead up to Tribal, we do get a lot of focus on Nathan and Frankie campaigning against Jess, with them clearly coming off as overconfident, to where we see Nathan literally go to Caroline and Kitty and tell them that he'll carry them through. And then we see him talking to Eden, to where he lists out the alliance, to where he says Eden's name last, to where all this leads to, again, strong content from Eden, him saying his survivor radar is going off and says that the strong people will take out the weak. Where Eden wants to set the tone, not playing in the strength, something that was very refreshing to see here. Where, again, Australian Survivor is a show that has been very much focused on physicality. I mean, in past seasons, we've seen these big alpha players take control early on, and while by the time they merge, there's this role reverse to where they become the big targets. I think it was very refreshing to see those alpha players be targeted right away on this season. The fact that there was a sizable minority that was able to build up to take out this stronger minority group was really interesting to see, especially considering it happens twice on this season. But here we do see Eden and Mark orchestrating this blind side, where Mark says that this is where he shines and this will be a test run for how he'll run the game, which felt like strong content there. So here we do see Eden getting Kitty and Caroline on board, while we see Mark getting Charles and the V's on board. The vote here landing on Frankie, which I think was a pretty strong move all around. I mean, taking out Frankie here is something that, one, it allows Jess to think that she's in charge, because she was the person that wanted to vote Frankie to begin with. You also separate Frankie from the V's, who supposedly were somewhat close, to where if Frankie had stayed around, that could have been a pretty dangerous position for someone like Mark in particular, who obviously wanted to work with the V's. Well, also it keeps around Nathan, who is probably the most physical person on this entire tribe. Now, again, I think there could be an argument to be made that why not just vote out Jess first, again, the perceived weakest member of the tribe, and keep physical strength, and the next time you go to tribal, you vote out Frankie. And I can understand that. However, I do think, again, for setting the tone of this season and just taking the outright majority on the offset, and again, not giving Frankie more time to bond with the V's, I think overall this was the correct call to make. Then we get to Tribal, where we do actually get some pretty strong content from JLP, who just in general was fantastic on this season. Again, there was a while where I did not particularly love JLP as a host, though I think in the last few seasons he's really come into his own, and here we do see him mocking the entire tribe for being in high spirits, leading to us getting this dodo content from Nathan, him being overconfident, talking about how he looks forward to the game finally starting. And we see him voting for Jess, saying, let's get this party started. All for, obviously, the majority to vote out Frankie in an 8-4 vote, with Eden calling her the Terminator and saying tonight is hasta la vista, baby, which again, I know people were probably annoyed by. I personally like it when people come into this with a preset voting confessional formula, and I kind of wish Eden stuck to it, as he doesn't really stick to the movie puns down the road. But again, I thought this was pretty fun at least. But I think the biggest shocker to me across this first episode is the fact that we actually got no twist, where typically Australian Survivor, something they like to do in the premieres, have this big twist to be this big moment in the premiere, yet we didn't have that here. We just allowed the players to play. So where, again, I'm kind of impressed with Australian Survivor production, the fact that they actually decided to do that. Where we did get a new showrunner starting with Heroes vs. Villains that seemed to be more aware how twist heavy the show had become. Where despite us obviously getting a few wonky twists moving forward, I feel like this was a good sign to how the show's going to be run moving forward. Anyway, with that, we do lose Frankie, who, again, was a really interesting first boot here. Again, a very shocking one that, again, like I literally had her as my number 2 contender coming into this season. And for her to be the first boot was mind-blowing to me, considering it feels like she has most of the skills that should do well in Australian Survivor. Again, she is a salon owner, and through that you would think she would have social skills, which, truth be told, I mean, like, we saw her be pretty decent socially, or outside of her overconfidence and her alliance with Nathan, I don't think she does that much actively wrong. But beyond that, I mean, again, she seems extremely physical. I mean, like, she's actually much bigger of a presence than I expected her to be. So, to be honest, if I knew how jacked she was, I probably wouldn't have had her as high as a winner pick, as I think she would have been someone that would have been sniped around the merge. But still, for her to be the first boot is pure insanity to me. But again, was a really good sign for the season to come. The fact that someone like Frankie could be the first boot, which really made this a really unpredictable ride. But with that, we then get to episode 2, which to me was one of the weaker episodes of the season. There was simply not as much going on here, but we do start off on the Titans tribe with Nathan being upset over having lost a sister in Frankie, only for him to say that she's pretty hot and that he's disappointed that she has a boyfriend and that she wouldn't let him sleep next to her, which all that was weird. But anyway, we got more focus on Eden and Mark alliance, where they call themselves the Invisible Hand, and talk about how Jess is taking the blame for their vote, and they allow Jess to just think it was her plan the entire time, obviously giving Jess this dodo content for her downfall in this episode, while also obviously propping up Eden and Mark as clearly being the main characters of this tribe. Now, on the Rebel side of things, really all of their content in this episode comes from before the reward challenge, which was very strange, but we do get get more content from Alex, showing him being annoyed at Kelly, showing Alex's importance in the season, all while we get a major focus on Sarah, with her getting her intro here about being a firefighter, and we get more talk about her alliance with Tobias, Alex, and Peta, who seem to be thinking that they're running the show, talking about how they want to target Raymond, to where we do get some Dodo content for Raymond, with him getting caught looking for an idol, and we get shots of him struggling to break a branch, which felt very Stephen Fishbacky, but yeah, really not much going on the Rebels tribe. So we get to the reward challenge, where we do get a tug of war challenge with them pulling a crate, where the winner of each round wins whatever's in the crate, to where the Titans end up winning most of the rounds here, and we get this ridiculous celebration during the final round of Charles being really over the top and Eden saying, "Are you not entertained?" Oh, we do also get a funny reaction from Winna. After winning one of the matchups, we see him just being disappointed that he just won a bundle of bananas, which is even more humorous because when we cut back to the Titans tribe, where Winna eats his banana, to where inside is a clue, to where this ends up leading to his intro video, all feeling like very situational content, where Winna has a strange edit in this season, where it does feel like he's only shown when absolutely necessary, and despite him getting a decent focus in this episode, again, was clearly just because he found the idol. So we do see Winna's relationship with Jaden here, and him telling him about the clue, and even here we get some Dodo content from him, and him forgetting what the clue said, and him saying, "I'm gonna get the idol tomorrow," which, again, was kind of strange, but we do cut to the morning where he does find the idol, probably being one of the most understated idol finds of this season. But then we get to the immunity challenge, which is, what do you know, another obstacle course challenge, which ended up being kind of close, but the Rebels ended up winning once again, leading back to the Titans tribe, where again, it was pretty clear that Jess was going home. It felt like it was very clearly set up, and to make matters worse, we do see Jess targeting Eden, with her wanting to protect the women, and you know, he's a threat because of how much he knows the game. But again, considering Eden's massive edit here, how many relationships we've seen him in, it felt very clear that he was not going home here. We do see Mark getting the credit for getting the vote onto Jess, which again was strong content for Mark, considering the fact that I think Jess was probably going home anyway. But Mark does decide to not tell Eden that he's in danger, only for Val to tell Eden instead, leading to Eden getting paranoid and creates his plan to split the vote on Nathan, though despite that ends up getting painted as paranoid and gets some pretty negative talk about him from the other players, despite the fact that this is the optimal strategy. It's like, why not split the vote in this situation? You have so many votes. Now, I get like people don't want to overcomplicate the vote, but it's still a situation where better safe than sorry, especially if you're the person that is supposedly the other person getting votes in this situation. But again, it's definitely not a great look for Eden's edit at this point. But anyway, we get the tribal, where again we get Jess being delusional once again, talking about leading the charge against Frankie and now leading the charge against Eden. We do see Jess even voting for Eden, saying that if the tribe honors honesty and loyalty over bullshit and manipulation, you'll go home, which is like, what does that mean? Like, why are you the arbiter of honesty and loyalty? But either way, it ends up being a 6-4-1 vote, where Jess does get voted out here, with Winna surprisingly voting for Nathan, which comes out of left field, considering Winna was shown to us as being part of Nathan's group. So again, it was very strange how that never gets explained, even though obviously in retrospect it's because he was closer to the majority group than what we had seen. But again, it never gets explained on the show. But anyway, with that, we do lose Jess, who again was fun enough on the show. Again, a typical early boo. And she got some humorous content at points. Or again, the lemon confessional is one that has stuck to me for some reason. Beyond that, again, like her delusional nature of thinking that she's running the game was also really humorous. Though again, she is a pretty bad player. I think she's probably the worst player of the season from my point of view. Or even the round of gameplay that she survives through, she does so seemingly due to nothing that she actually did herself. And for the entire tribe to go against her the following round, I think it's pretty indicative of how poor of a game she played. But with that, we get to episode 3, a humorous episode in the fact that it's a complete parallel to episode 1, just from the other perspective. So in this episode, again, we get very little content from the Titans tribe, with the Rebels really taking the forefront finally. Well, on the Titans tribe, we do get the introduction to the Middle Age Mafia, this alliance between Caroline, Kitty, Eden, and Mark, which was clearly set up for longevity on this season, being this alliance that's set up as this majority on the Titans group. While we get to the reward challenge, which ends up being a 2v2 challenge of them being in a cage and having to be the first to get out, and ends up being a pretty physical challenge here, mostly unnotable, outside the fact that Mark ends up winning the match point for the Titans, really showing off how quick he is in the water, which leads to everyone being surprised here, including JLP. Well, the challenge does end with a bit of a strange segment of Kelly asking Nathan if he's single, and her celebrating celebrating when he says he is, with Nathan saying wait until the tribe swap, and Kelly begging JLP for one night with him, which all this was just very strange, but playing into the kooky character that Kelly is. But anyway, we get the Titans going back to camp where we see them getting their reward, which ends up being canned food, which we do get some focus on Jaden here, with him talking about how he likes spam and he wants a spam only for Mark to take the spam instead, but then he finds out he gets peaches, which he's happy about, and all this was very strange, but like kind of fun content from Jaden, who like in general I found to be a pretty fun character on this season. Again, a very questionable player, but one that at least had a really fun energy, with him kind of coming off as a troll throughout most of the show. But anyway, we then get to the Rebel side of things, where we do see Peeta becoming a main narrator here, talking about how her alliance is the strong physical people and that they're targeting Kelly and Raymond, blatantly coming off as overconfident here in the same way that Frankie did in the premiere, which again was this fun parallel between the tribes and how they both had these similar dynamics across the first week, with both tribes having this cocky athletic minority getting toppled at their first vote, with everyone else kind of ganging up on them, which again was very refreshing content coming from Australian Survivor. But here we do get focused on the Alex and Peeta relationship, with them talking about how they're running this show and them going out to look for an idol, with Peeta ending up finding it, and mixing that with the fact that Peeta's alliance ends up being so overconfident they talking about throwing the immunity challenge to get rid of Raymond and Kelly. It makes this an even better downfall than even Frankie in the premiere, where it just feels like that round of gameplay on steroids, with Peeta doing things even more wrong than Frankie. But here we do see Peeta talking about needing numbers, to where we do see them pull in Kirby and Rihanna, where Kirby finally gets introduced to the show, again in episode 3, getting her intro of being an AFL coach, but we do see her playing both sides here, and her also having a relationship with Ferris and Garrick, really setting up this future complex rivalry between Kirby and Ferris. But again, all this being strange that this happens in episode 3, which obviously this is the first point where it's relevant, but for me that was a bit of a red flag for Kirby in particular. The fact that she didn't even get properly introduced to the show until episode 3, in a situation where she was pretty much invisible entirely for his first 2 episodes. But anyway, we get to the immunity challenge, which again, another obstacle course challenge, with the Rebels struggling right away, seemingly not being able to move their cart, obviously due to the fact that Peeta's alliance is not pushing and throwing the challenge, with them making it just too obvious at how they're throwing this, to where we even see Tobias then pretend like he's struggling with shooting the slingshot. And it's funny that despite all this, the Rebels still almost win this challenge, but the Titans do end up pulling it out by the end. Then we get back to camp, where we do see the majority of the players talking at the well and organizing the split vote plan between Raymond and Kelly, with Kelly being the presumed target, with Alex being excited at the fact that no one knew that they were throwing the challenge, only for us to cut to Garrick, who calls bullshit and says that he smells a rat, because that's just a thing that Garrick says all the time. To where this is where we do see the Kirby Ferris Garrick relationship come to roost, to where we do see them putting the votes onto Peeta. And we do get a lot of focus around Kelly here, with her being told to chill and not blow up the plan, where we get Dodo content from her being this terrible actress in her conversation to Sarah, to where we just see Garrick being annoyed at her in the background, saying she's doing too much, which ends up being this really fun dynamic between those two, with Garrick being the straight man in this dynamic. Again, us seeing him react to all of Kelly's really wacky moments. But again, coming into the tribal, it did feel pretty obvious that Peeta was set up for a fall here, though despite that we do get a final moment before tribal of Kirby and Rihanna talking about how the vote is split, and that's good for them, as they could now vote with the Cuddle crew. And even despite that, Peeta would still go, with Kirby saying that she orchestrated the vote but wants to also vote with the other side, so they trust her. And this is terrible gameplay in my point of view, which is really the strange thing about Kirby in general. Kirby is someone that is so naturally skilled for the game, someone that did not even know the game particularly well coming in this season, but seems to be so good socially that where people just want to trust her and want to work with her, despite the fact that she is terrible strategically. She makes these strategic moves that just feel like her doing just too much. She does this move to gain trust with both sides, when in reality this is a move that burns trust with both sides. Yes, it could build bonds with the Cuddle crew in the short term, but eventually they're going to find out that you were the one that turned against them, which will make them even more bitter against you. Well, for your real alliance in Ferris and Garrick, this is now burning them, especially in showing how schemy you can be in coming up with this plan to begin with, only for you to not be the one that goes through with it, which severs her relationship with them. And again, it's just an all-around terrible move, but it's weird that the edit props this up as a good move, which again was actually decent content for Kirby in that sense, which is a constant presence across the season, her making these big moves that are getting propped up in the edit despite them being bad for her game. And we do get the tribal, where I do feel like most people play this pretty poorly, where again, it's supposed to be a PETA blindside. We do even talk about people assuming that PETA has an idol. And for Raymond to say that he likes most of the people on the tribe, making it clear to people he doesn't like. Well, Ferris also says that some people need to be made an example of, and Alex even picking up on that, saying that that's an interesting comment. And this is all pretty poor play, but again, we get to the vote where PETA doesn't play her idol, and the vote comes up initially between Kelly and Raymond, only for us to end with the PETA blindside and a 6-3 vote. Blindside with the idol in her pocket. Again, this great way to finish week 1. Again, this being a direct parallel to episode 1, but kind of on steroids, with there just being added stakes to it. But again, with that, we do lose PETA, who again was my winner pick coming into the season, and I'm really surprised at how terribly she played, where I think she might be my worst winner pick possibly ever, gameplay wise. I mean, maybe you could argue with Aubrey from Edge of Extinction, but like PETA plays this season just all wrong, in that she creates a very solid minority group that is very apparent to everyone else outside of her, and also treats people on the bottom pretty terribly, to where that turns them against her. She finds an idol just to not play it. She throws the challenge to go to tribal that she gets voted out at, and it's again, all this is just so bad. So again, while she does at least make it to episode 3 in comparison to someone like Frankie, I think she does more actively wrong than Frankie, which again is part of what made this episode just again a better version of episode 1, but definitely makes PETA a very underwhelming player on the season, but one that at least had a glorious downfall that at least was fun to watch. But then we get to episode 4, another really lopsided episode with most of the Titans content coming very early on, where a lot of it ends up being revolved around Caroline, with her finally being introduced to the show, with her becoming a major character on this season, despite the fact that she was invisible week 1. Well, here we get her intro video about being a midwife, and we instantly get her set up to her distrust of Mark, which ends up being this pretty lasting storyline across the season. But talks about how she's wary of his relationship with the V's, setting up this rivalry between the two. Also Valeria as well, where you see Valeria having an awkward conversation with her and saying that she's sweet Caroline that's not so sweet. But again, the rest of the content takes place on the Rebels tribe, where here we finally get introduced to Eileen, with her talking about her upbringing and us seeing more of her strategy talks, which made it pretty clear she was going to be important to this episode. Oh, we see Kirby talking about how everyone thinks that she's on their side after the move last night, only for us to cut to Garrick, who says that he's trained to catch a rat. And Garrick talks to Kirby saying that you should have told me about the vote, and that he cried over her last night, which again felt very out of place for Garrick. But obviously we have Ferris also being upset at how she lied to them, which really kickstarts their rivalry here. But this leads to Ferris getting content about finding a hatch, a lock on it, where he doesn't know where the key is, taking us to the reward challenge. So I wonder who's gonna win the reward. The reward challenge ends up being a pretty mundane physical challenge of having to be the first to ring a bell. So we do finally see Winna miss the bell in the match point, leading to the Rebels winning here instead. Where it's not the reward, where everyone ends up seeing the keys. There, Ferris obviously knows where the box is, and we do see everyone hunting for the lock in groups, where we do see Ferris going with Raymond and Garrick, setting up his relationship with them, and ends up opening up the box to inside find an idol, obviously, that Ferris gets to keep, but interestingly also gets the key to the box on the other side, which is an interesting addition here. Obviously, it's a modification of the David and Sean idol from Champs Contenders 2, of Ferris now being able to build a relationship with the other side and giving that person an idol. It's an interesting dynamic to add here, even though it doesn't actually really play into much on this season, outside the fact that Ferris ends up getting caught here, where Ferris ends up revealing to the entire tribe that he has the key to the opposing tribe, but obviously does not reveal the idol, which again does feel misguided here. I mean, at this point, you might as well just reveal everything. Might as well just have a public idol, as again, people are going to be sus of you anyway. And we do see Ferris just outright lying to Alex's face, which just felt unnecessary. But the reason does set up Ferris wanting Alex out now, clearly saying about to be the target for the upcoming round. Anyway, we then get to the immunity challenge, where Ferris does just openly ask the other tribe if they found a treasure box. So we see them all being confused, which does lead to this funny little moment of the Rebels kind of taunting the Titans, with the Titans not seeming to believe Ferris' story, though we do see Ferris outright telling Mark to look for a treasure box, not an idol, which in itself also felt like kind of sloppy play, as, I mean, this is all but confirmation to Mark that Ferris has an idol, which is like, the fact that he's telling Mark before his own tribe is definitely pretty sketchy there. Anyway, the challenge itself ends up being Survivor Dodgeball, which was strange, and we do see Rihanna losing the Rebels the challenge here by throwing her ball at Eden, despite the fact that Eden was already out of the challenge. But coming out of the challenge, we do see Alex talking about how he's excited for Tribal, which it's like, Like, why? As he's clearly the target at this point. And speaking of why, we then cut to Tobias, who finally gets to talk on the show. What a shocker. Where he says that the group losing is a bummer, but he doesn't care because he's a strong player and they're not going to vote him out just yet. Which he says here because he couldn't suck anymore. But again, we do literally see him having a conversation with Kelly where he just openly tells her that he's not going anywhere, which makes it look very ironic by the end of this episode. Again, we do get a lot of content here about how much Kelly is a loose cannon and her constantly having to be a reassurer of the plan. The plan itself ends up being led by Eileen here, with her talking about splitting the vote between Alex and Tobias, where her plan is to make Sarah the deciding vote on the revote, essentially them knowing that she'll vote out Alex over Tobias, which really I don't get why Eileen was so gung-ho about this plan. Like, really, it just seemed kind of unnecessary. I mean, obviously, it's something that, again, good content for the show, but doesn't really add much strategically to the game, though. What does end up happening here, though, finally, the way this actually does end up playing out ends up being even better for the show than that. But here we do see the co-crew clearly still thinking that Kirby is on their side and end up trying to get the vote onto Ferris, with Alex revealing to the others that Ferris has an idol, which should have been implied anyway. But again, why are you targeting the guy that has the idol in a position where you can't split the vote? Like, that seems extremely misguided here. And it's funny that they do so because Alex says, oh, it's time to get a big player out, despite him literally saying the complete opposite in the following episode. Here we do see Ferris being sus of Kirby and Ree's conversations, again, kind of being a typical trope of Ferris on this season. But considering the split vote plan, Ferris knows that if Kirby and Rihanna flip, then he's going out, making it pretty clear that he was going to play his idol at this point, which straight up is the right move. I do think at this point where his idol is pretty much a public idol, there's talk about targeting him due to the fact that he has an idol. I do think it is better for him to just give up the idol in this situation and try to rebuild trust with the people that he lied to. Now, again, straight up, I think the better move would have just been to not lie about the idol to begin with. But I think at the point where everyone is suspicious you of an idol, I think you might as well just get rid of it in this situation. But anyway, we get the tribal where it ends up being a pretty fun one, where we get this fun bickering between Alex and Kelly, with Alex talking about how his relationship with Kelly reminds him of his relationship with his mom, where he loves his mom, but they butt heads, but then says Kelly's not his mom, where he's essentially just saying outright that I don't like Kelly. I mean, you see Alex being asked if it's a love or hate relationship, and Alex says it's more like dealing with each other, which is insane. Alex is saying all this only for Kelly to be the person that actually directly saves him here. Or again, it was going to be Alex going home here. Yet as Kelly goes up to vote, we get the voice of Eileen playing in the background, detailing the plan, which made it very clear that Kelly was going to mess up the plan. And after all the votes are read, we do see Ferris trying to do to George, pulling out his idol in a position where people can't change the votes anymore, where he takes off his shirt to reveal his idol around his neck, which is in this moment where Kelly calls him the Smiling Assassin, which I guess is his nickname. But again, we get to the vote itself, where again, it was assumed it was going to be a 4-4 tie between Alex and Tobias, but what do you know? It's a 5-3 vote, with Tobias getting voted out and Kelly messing up the plan. So we see everyone on the tribe being blindsided outside of Kelly, with Kelly winking to Alex and saying that this is a move against her alliance's best judgment, saying that she can work with Alex, but she can't with Tobias, which straight up, all this is obviously just a terrible move. I mean, it's really just showing Kelly off as a very unreliable number, where really the strength of Kelly in this game is the fact that she is such a obvious goat to be dragged to the end, where through that, if you just show that you're someone that can be dragged, then you'll probably make it to the end. But through making a move like this, she just shows herself to be extremely unreliable, to where she's already a liability to the tribe to begin with, where no one likes her. She's not good at challenges. So the main reason to keep her around is just due to how little of a threat she is. But if she's messing up your own plans, then she is a threat to your game. So all of this was just astronomically dumb gameplay from Kelly's point of view. But again, she survives despite that because Kirby is Kirby. But anyway, with that, we do lose Tobias, and Tobias sucks. I think Tobias is a terrible player, also not a particularly likable personality on the show. He's just kind of a weird casting choice to me. Again, we see him being extremely overconfident, despite the fact that he has no reason to be. Again, we see him talking about how, oh, I'm not going home this vote, despite the fact that he was just in the minority the following round. Like, I don't understand why he thought he was so safe. And even if he's not safe, then, like, wouldn't it just be one of your allies? I guess he was under the assumption that it would be Kelly instead, but why? When that didn't happen the previous round. And beyond that, again, like him making like L signs to Titans when they lose. It's just like, yeah, he just seems like a terrible player. I don't know why he was here. Just seemed really bland outside of the points where he's being really mean-spirited and overconfident, where I don't think he really added much to the show here, where, again, like in the choice between him and Alex, I was very happy Tobias went home here, as at least Alex was fun on the show, while Tobias just kind of sucked. Now for episode 5, which ends up being our first non-elimination episode of the season, and one where we once again get very little content from the Titans tribe here, where really the majority of it is focused around the hunt for the treasure box, with Mark getting a major focus here and him revealing, surprisingly to me, that he's more loyal to the V's than to the middle-aged mafia, with that, again, to me, coming out of left field, where it does feel like week 1 was so much focused around his relationship with Eden, and for that to be kind of dropped at this point felt very jarring to me. All this leads up to, who would have guessed, Mark finding the box, and nothing else happening on that tribe for the rest of the episode. So where again, most of the episode takes place on the Rebels tribe, where we do start off with Sarah being emotional about Tobias going home, leading to a funny moment here of Kelly revealing that she changed her vote and telling Sarah that she had to make choices that were tough and that she's made these type of choices her entire life. And we get this like inspirational music playing in the background, all while we then cut to Scott laughing in confessional, which with that means Scott's on the show. It's a miracle. Where here he gets content being used to vocalize the majority being confused over the terrible move that Kelly made, with Alex himself being confused over why Kelly saved him and is actually upset at the fact that she now thinks that he owes her, which again shows this move instantly turn around on her. But we do get the reward challenge where it is a 1v1 and them being tethered to an idol, and they have to knock out the other player's idol before theirs. And this is a pretty easy Rebels win, with them not letting Kelly play despite her constantly begging here, which is kind of a trend on this season. Though we do get a pretty funny moment from Raymond winning the match point in a matchup where he gets distracted mid-round by Charles's Untitled Goose Game shirt. But again, they end up easily winning here, getting a Survivor Kids party and childhood photos, which was weird but also boring. And the immunity challenge this episode also ends up being another big obstacle course challenge, though through that we get another funny moment of Nathan missing some shots of the coconuts at the end, with JLP saying that he's busting nut after nut. But here we do have Kelly struggling on the plank bridge after volunteering for it because she thinks that she's so good at balance, to where she ends up costing the Rebels the win here, with Garrick once again getting content of him saying, why can't we just vote her out? Which it's like, I mean, you could have. But obviously this leads to her being the initial target, where we do see everyone agree to vote for Kelly at the water well, with Kirby staying behind to talk to Kelly, which is where we get Kirby talking about how she needs her for her game, talking about using her as a distraction, as Kirby has decided that now is the time to take out Ferris, because he's a dangerous player and in a powerful position, despite the fact that Ferris himself talks about wanting to work with Kirby and that they can do damage together. And again, just in general, a really unnecessary move here for Kirby, one that just further burns her relationship with Ferris, and does so for no real reason. You're so early on in the game. Ferris is someone that is so willing to work with you. And again, it's this situation where moving forward, Kirby does get a bit of a high horse for Ferris later coming after her, tries to put the blame on him when again, it's entirely on her, and she burned trust with him to begin with, and even then he forgave her, only for her to then directly come for him in this round. And it's a move that should have directly backfired on her, though she obviously gets saved by the Donna Lim that ends up happening. But here we do see Kirby going to Scott and Alex, saying that she is voting for Ferris, with Alex in this point clearly not being on board, which is actually kind of humorous considering obviously Alex did vote for Ferris the previous round, yet now he wants to keep Ferris around. And we do see him pulling over Ferris and Garrick and revealing to them that Kirby and Rihanna are plotting against them, with Ferris seemingly getting emotional in confessional after this, saying it's upsetting that Kirby is coming for him and he doesn't understand why. And again, it just shows how bad of a move this is for Kirby. This is where we do see them plan to now vote out Rihanna for some reason. Don't even understand why over Kirby. It's not even explained on the show. Now, I think it's somewhat safe to assume it's probably just due to social connections and them thinking they can get the votes on Kirby. But still, targeting of Rihanna in this position didn't fully make sense to me, but we do see Ferris pulling in Eileen and Scott on this vote, to where Scott ends up being propped up in the edit as the person in the middle. And based on exit press and everything, it does seem like he actually was on board with taking out Rihanna, which is kind of weird considering he does later flip in the following round. But once we get to Tribal, that's for naught anyway, as JOP reveals that tonight is a little different. Obviously, as there was a lot of time left in the episode, but I will say before that we did actually get some pretty good bickering between Kelly and Alex at Tribal, with them blaming each other for the challenge loss, which was especially humorous from Kelly there. But we do get the reveal that the twist for the episode is kind of a generic one here of the person that you vote out tonight will not be voted out of the game and instead be sent on a mission to be a saboteur on the Titans. Or if they sabotage the Titans at the next immunity challenge, they can rejoin the Rebels, and if they fail, they stay on the Titans, aka just giving them immunity until the swap, as we swap the following round anyway. So all this just felt like kind of a waste of time, but it does lead to some fun character moments, as we'll later see. But it also leads to a pretty decent Tribal here, in that Kirby now realizes that she can't send Ferris over, as he does have the key, which means that he'll essentially be guaranteed an idol if he goes over to the other side, where Ferris now wants to be sent over, only for Kirby to just blatantly be anti-Ferris at this point at Tribal, which was definitely a choice. But obviously, everyone ends up voting for Kelly here, with Kelly not even remembering the task as she's about to go to the other side, which is humorous. And we literally end the episode with her yelling surprise over and over again as she arrives at Titan Beach in the middle of the night, which is, again, funny moment there. But it does take us to episode 6, where you see Kelly obviously arriving at the Titans tribe, to where when telling her story to the Titans, she really ends up sending mixed signals there, telling them that her alliance was most of the tribe, yet she somehow got voted out, and talks about how there's no sus on her, only for us to get Eden voicing his sus on her, which was all pretty negative content there. Oh, on the Rebels tribe, we get talk about how quiet it is without Kelly there, and Alex really gloating and how excited he is that she's gone. Well, beyond that, we do get the reward challenge, with them having to stay up while being pressed up to their partner back to back. A pretty mundane challenge, though Eileen and Rihanna end up winning it for the Rebels. But as for the content on the Rebels tribe, we do see Scott admitting to Kirby that they were targeting Rihanna, drawing a line in the sand between the two sides there. Oh, while we do see Ferris and Raymond go idol hunting while everyone's eating the reward, only for Ferris to find the idol in this position and decide to just openly tell a lot of the people in the middle that he has an idol, telling Scott and Alex, saying that his plan is to plant seeds and cause doubt, and talk about how simplistically people typically use idols, and he can use this to save them multiple times, which, I mean, to be fair, he does, and it does kind of work to his favor, with him very rarely even being talked about as the person to directly get the votes moving forward, and it typically being put onto his close allies instead. But it does also lead to some people just outright doubting that he has an idol, thinking that he's lying in this instance. But coming to the immunity challenge, we do get Kelly talking about how she is loyal to the Rebels, but she does like the Titans and is divided on what to do, to where we get to the challenge, it being this big obstacle course once again, to where here we do see Kelly offering to sit out, which was really humorous here, to see the Rebels being shocked at that and having Kelly mess up their plans once again, only for the Rebels to win immunity anyway. And again, either way, Kelly is safe, so none of it really mattered to her, but surprisingly, she does actually go back to camp with the Titans, with the twist not being revealed until Tribal itself. We get to the Titans camp, where Nathan clearly knows that he's in danger here, with him talking about how his tribe's not afraid to vote out strength. And I think it's interesting that Nathan actually is aware of his position at this point, considering I do think his direct counterpart in the opposing tribe is Alex, someone who is not as aware of his position. But it is funny here that we do get Mark and Viola going back to the box here, only to then just break it open, which I guess is allowed, with Mark getting the idol inside, which, again, you would think that they would be forced to use the key, but I guess not. I guess that's not a thing. But he ends up finding the idol here alongside Viola, and ends up only telling Val about the idol, again, making it clear that he's close to the V's in this position, along with the fact that they do also mention potentially going after Caroline, where we do then get content that's anti-Caroline here, and we do see Winna eating a lot of food, and Caroline calling him out for it, only for her in confessional then talk about Nathan eats too much, which was strange. Here we do see Caroline getting the credit for what ends up actually happening, and then there's a split vote between Nate and Jaden, with Nathan as the target. This is where we do see Mark saying that Nathan is an easy vote, but it is an easy opportunity to switch things up. Which I will say, why switch things up when you're in the middle? Which, I mean, to be fair, Mark doesn't go through with any of this, but I don't even understand why this is even consideration of messing up his position in the middle to take out Caroline and create enemies with half of the tribe. But there is talk about getting the votes of Winna, Nathan, and Jaden to take out Caroline, to where we do literally see Viola actually enact this plan, going to Jaden and Winna about voting Caroline, and they proceed to tell Nathan. And us seeing Viola actually do the legwork for this plan made me actually think that this was going to go through. I did spend the back portion of this episode very much thinking that Caroline was going home, as it would be idiotic for her to put Caroline's name out like this and not go through with it. And what do you know? She actually does. And also, what do you know? It blows up her game in the following round, making Caroline very aware of the fact that she's coming for her. But we get the tribal where Kelly's mission's now complete and she rejoins the rebels, but really none of that ended up changing the plan here anyway, to where we do get some funny content from Jaden being confused about the plan, because that's Jaden for you. But by the time of the vote, Caroline does get this great voting confessional, voting for Nathan, saying that he's one in her line of scalps that she intends on taking on our way through the game, which I really like seeing Caroline as this really cutthroat, villainous figure on the show, something that you don't typically see from the older woman archetype. And I will say, like, Caroline did get a lot of negative reception from outside the show, which was always just kind of perplexing to me. It always felt very gendered the way people reacted to her, especially in comparison to someone like Mark. But anyway, Nathan gets voted out here in a 6-3-1 vote, which again did minorly shock me. But with that, again, we did lose Nathan, who was a fun character on this season for the time he was there. Again, he had some pretty fun Dodo content in the first few episodes. Now, straight up in the lead up to his vote off, it did feel like it got a bit more subdued, where it felt like most of his good content came from the first 2 episodes. But he's still someone that I thought was a pretty fun villain for the show, someone that I could very much see being brought back at some point down the road, especially if it's a larger scale returnee season, where again, Australian Survivors typically had issues finding 24 people for their all-star casts, to where I do think Nathan is someone that would perfectly fit a cast like that, to where he's actually someone that I do kind of expect to see down the road. But then we get to episode 7, which obviously ends up being the swap episode, though we do end up spending a lot of time early on in the episode at the individual camps setting up the dynamics, with there obviously being these split lines on both sides, with us getting more of the Kirby versus Ferris dynamic, along with also seeing Eden talking about being worried about Mark's relationship with the V's, setting up the 2 opposing sides, both of which, again, like feeling in parallel to each other, where Ferris and Caroline were both these people that wanted to work with their respective rivals and wanted to just keep the majority together, only for the likes of Kirby and Mark to fight against the other and cause fractions within the majority. And it is kind of funny just how parallel the 2 tribes end up playing out in the pre-merge here. Now, before the actual swap, we do also get some funny content from Kelly returning to camp and the rebels trying to get any information out of her, only for her to just not reveal anything, and her claiming that she orchestrated the vote against Nathan, which Ferris obviously doubts. And we do get the tribe being annoyed at her not throwing the challenge, and we get a little fight between her and Alex. But anyway, it leads up to the tribe swap, which again at the time felt like underwhelming timing, as again the tensions were just starting to rise, and it felt like both of these sides were about to crack against each other, though it ends up working out pretty perfectly here, with the leaders of the 2 opposing factions ending up on the same tribe together. So here we do see them pick buffs one by one, with there being one special buff, which ends up having the person that picked it getting to pick what tribe they're going on, though they have to do so immediately after picking that buff, which I do find to be a largely inoffensive twist there, though Raymond ends up getting the special buff early on, which was kind of unlucky, but fortunately does get swapped over most of his allies, where again we do see Ferris and Kitty, alongside most of Ferris's allies, get swapped to the new Titans tribe, while the entire middle-aged mafia end up swapping over to the new Rebels tribe. Now, straight up, we do get very little content on the new Titans tribe here, with Valeria getting strong content here, to where despite being swap screwed in this position, having lost both Mark and Viola, and also being at a numbers disadvantage, she does get propped up for doing good social work here, and her serving food to the others, which again, her constant presence on this season, that content being pretty positive, they're a pretty tough contender throughout most of the season, though surprisingly here, we do also get some focus on Scott, who does lead the charge in trying to get the OG Rebels to stick together, with him trying to broker peace between Ferris and Kirby. That obviously doesn't end up lasting, but we do get to the immunity challenge, where they move a ball from one gutter to the next, going from player to player, which was just a weird challenge that was just not particularly interesting to watch. Though here we do see Caroline struggling right away, and that leads to the Titans winning with a massive lead. So on the new Rebels tribe, we do see Alex, Sarah, and Rihanna on the bottom, though this is where we do get some pretty strong content from Alex, and seeing him throwing Rihanna and Sarah under the bus, and leaking to the other side that they're looking for idols, and seemingly being the safest of the Rebels at this point. Always see Rihanna campaigning to the Titans, saying that she's tight with Kirby and Scott, and that if she makes it emerge, she'll bring in the numbers, which is kind of a weird campaign here. Now, I mean, again, it gives mixed signals. Obviously, yes, it means that if you make it to the merge, then you could potentially work with Kirby and Scott, and it could be numbers for you, but it could also be the opposite. Those could be numbers against you, and that means Rhianna is a threat in the game. So again, I do think it gave very conflicting messages there, to where I think it probably would have just been better to take a different approach. But either way, Mark does talk about wanting to go 6 strong here and take out a rebel, which is the optimal strat for him at this point, obviously, with him being placed in the middle no matter what. Third, you see the original plan being to split the vote on Rhianna and Sarah, with Rhianna as the target. Though, this is where we do see Viola not feeling comfortable working with the OG Titans, saying that she doesn't trust Caroline or Kitty, and saying that her and Mark need to make a move before they make a move on them. But Mark ends up shutting it down here, saying it's too soon, which, and he's obviously wrong in the fact that it's not too soon, but I also feel like for Mark himself, again, it doesn't really matter that much, as again, he just has so many options as long as he doesn't do what he does in the following episode. Though obviously it is a lot more integral for Viola in particular. But this is where you see Caroline watching their conversation and picks up on the fact that Viola wants to vote for her. And again, already knowing that Viola threw out her name in the previous round, we do see her and Kitty create a plan to take out Viola by getting the rebel women on board of this plan, which again is the correct move for Caroline to get rid of Viola and taking the first shot here. Something that like the edit seems to indicate is like a bad move moving forward, which is very strange, with it seeming to take the Valeria and Mark's side of the argument and talking about as if Caroline was in the wrong, when again, in reality, this is definitely the move to make. She knew Viola was against her. And again, something that to me, Mark and the V's started first. So again, this is simply her just playing defensively at this point. But when you see her and Kitty go to Eden and tell him to vote for V to weaken Mark, which Eden is clearly skeptical at this, thinking that it's too early and worried about losing his relationship with Mark, to which, again, like Eden is also thinking about this correctly as well, only for Caroline to call him erratic and irrational, which is such a strange aspect of Eden's edit on this season, and the fact that I think he's playing pretty optimally for pretty much his entire run on this season, yet despite that we constantly get talk about how people think he's paranoid and how he doesn't make the right calls. But Eden does, again, make the right call here in saying that we need to rope in Jaden, to which they go to Jaden, and obviously Jaden just says yes, because that's Jaden. So we get the tribal, pretty mundane tribal, but Caroline does end up voting out Viola, giving another great voting confessional, saying, I delivered thousands of babies, but this time I'm delivering my first blindside, and guess what? It's a baby girl. For Viola is blindsided here, and what was propped up as the biggest blindside yet, which, I mean, I guess. Well, obviously, losing Viola here was definitely a big loss this season. Viola is someone that I was shocked to lose this early. I mean, she is someone that I very much expected to be an endgamer on this season. I mean, the fact that we got so much set up to a relationship with Valeria and Mark, and her obviously being so hyped up in the promos, like it very much screamed out to me as her being someone that was set up for the endgame. For her to be sniped out here at the swap was so surprising to me. But again, I do think it's warranted. I think when looking at how she played the game, I do think she just simply made a massive misstep in making it too open that she's going after Caroline. So while I do think she gets swap screwed to a degree, in the fact that I do think more than likely she would have had the numbers had the tribe swap not happen, I do think she actually handles her relationship with Caroline pretty poorly, to where I think it makes a lot of sense why she's taken out in this position. But again, someone that I could very much see being brought back down the road as well. Again, someone that, again, if there's a big returning season filling up 24 slots, I feel like she's someone that should be on that cast, to where I do think she would have a lot of potential for down the road. But then we get to episode 8, where we do start off with a weird segment at the Titan tribe of Scott, Raymond, and Ferris playing around as pirates, which was weird, though it does lead to Scott getting his intro about being an art director. This is where Ferris does talk about liking Kirby in the beginning and would love to work with her, but is obviously worried at her potentially working with the Titans. So we do see him trying to put in some work with the Titans here, with Valeria talking about this opening up opportunities, again, giving us her perspective when it's not necessary, which again seemed like good content for her. But again, none of this content really matters as they just reiterate all this next episode anyway. But on the Rebel side of things, we do see one of the most hectic rounds of gameplay here, where it does start off with Caroline telling Mark that she felt like she was losing him and that they took out Viola to bring him back closer, only for Mark to be super bitter in this instance, saying that you're asking me to go all in on you, but you excluded me in the vote, and saying that he needs time to process this, which is like, why? Just lie. Like, to me, this was really dumb, and Mark the next morning does end up lying, saying that he wants to work together, only for him to reveal in confessional that he's obviously really upset, and says that he's not going to blow up his game right now, but he wants revenge with a capital R, but he has to be smart, which he doesn't end up being. Anyway, we get to the immunity challenge, where the Titans do end up seeing Viola gone, with Valeria obviously being shocked and calls them snakes, and asks them who initiated the vote, only for no one to respond, saying, does anyone have guts and balls? And really just overall, I do feel like Valeria comes off pretty indignant over Viola's elimination here. Again, ironically coming off very emotional on how she acts in relation to it moving forward, despite the fact that she claims that she's not. Anyway, the challenge itself ends up being another obstacle course that the Titans get a massive lead in, with the Rebels arguing over the puzzle to where the Titans easily win. So we leave this challenge with Mark saying that tonight's vote is about revenge. Again, him definitely not blowing up his game right now. So we get to the Rebels tribe, where again Mark ends up doing a lot here, going to Alex and telling him to gather the Rebels together, while also going to the Titans and telling them to split the vote onto Rhianna and Sarah so that he can win out in a plurality, and getting Kitty out. And all this is just bad and turning against this alliance that you had from the very beginning, the only alliance that you have on this tribe, an alliance that wanted to work with you at this point. Bad in trying to pull off this move without securing your relations with Rhianna and Sarah, to where they very clearly had better relations with, like, so Caroline and Kitty, who they literally just worked with in the previous round against you, and we literally don't even see him approaching them until after Caroline had already talked to them about voting out Mark, which, I mean, was finally under his orders of him telling them that he's okay with being the decoy vote. And again, we do see him campaigning to Rhianna and Sarah, them clearly not being on board, and Rhianna talking about how Mark is being desperate, and they end up going and telling Kitty about this plan, and that Mark wants her out, to where we finally get a Kitty confessional, with her being the last person to get a confessional on this season. And it's a confessional saying that she doesn't believe them, and that she's siding with Mark in this instance, which is wrong, which is a bad starting look for her, but also in essence, again, does show how loyal the middle-aged mafia was to Mark in this instance, that they don't even believe the fact that Mark would turn on them. But this leads to her going to Mark and telling him what Rhianna and Sarah said about him, which leads to this being an even grander mess, with Kitty saying that Mark is smart and he wouldn't do this. Which, I mean, is he? And Mark, despite all this, decides to then try to get Rhianna and Sarah on board again, this time proceeding to tell them that he has an idol, which is, again, ridiculous. You're telling these people that literally just ratted you out that you have an idol, which, again, like, I understand his rationale and thinking that, okay, if I tell them that I have an idol, that means that they're going to be more secure in going through this plan because they'll think it's more likely to be successful. But they don't have reason to trust you to begin with, though, and openly don't trust you. So all this was just really stupid to me. And we do see Alex trying to get them on board, only for Sarah to literally just leave the conversation and blow it up to the Titans again, and telling them about how worried she is that the vote is being split on her. Or we do see Kitty just being terrible at lying here, just simply saying, I don't know, over and over again, which, again, her inability to lie gets talked about constantly moving forward in the season. But we do get pretty confusing content coming out of this, with Sarah seemingly not being on board with working with Mark coming out of this conversation, only for Rhianna to tell her that that's the only option they have, only for these opinions to flip by the time of the vote. Again, we do get the tribal, where we do see, again, some pretty good work from Eden here, and him picking up on the fact that Mark is trying to do something here, to which we do see him telling his alliance to vote for Sarah and stop the split vote plan, getting the entire group on board. But anyway, we get to the vote itself, where we do get a lot of setup here of what is Rhianna gonna do, which really just comes out of nowhere, making it clear that she was going to mess up the plan. We're following this, we do see Mark playing the idol on himself, only for it to be revealed that Rhianna had voted for Mark, to where Sarah ends up being taken out here in a 4-3 vote, in a position where obviously Sarah's closest ally and Rhianna end up messing up a tie vote for her here, something that Rhianna actually does again down the road. But again, all this being a pretty insane series of events. I mean, like, considering this was a pretty mundane Sarah vote off, someone that was just clearly on the bottom, I think the path to that was just absolute insanity, and was a really fun ride here, to where this does end up being one of the best episodes of the season to me. But with that, we lose Sarah, who, I mean, was kind of bland on this season. I mean, obviously she has like this backstory that Australian Survivor loves, her being this female firefighter, and through that, her being seemingly good at challenges and everything, but she just seemed kind of bland to me. me. I mean, really, personality-wise, she didn't really bring much to the table. Well, gameplay-wise, she felt very similar to, like, Flick from Brains vs. Brawn to me, of her being, again, decent enough socially, but just, like, not active enough strategically, and obviously gets taken out in this position where she was kind of swap-screwed, though, to be fair, she was never really in that good of a position to begin with. So really, for me, Sarah was kind of just the perfect fodder to go out in a vote like this, to where I was overall pretty satisfied in how this episode played out. Then we get to episode 9, which ends up being another pretty incredible episode here. Really, this entire week 3 of the show, was just an insane ride. But we do start off with only one scene on the Rebels tribe here, where finally we get no reaction from Rhianna on how she messed up the previous vote. Instead, we entirely focus it around Caroline and Mark, where Caroline asks him why he did it, and he said it was for his game, which if it was, that was dumb. But Mark says that now he wants to get back together, which, I mean, you would think would be too late. Though we do see Caroline saying that it'd be unexpected for them to be working together again, and she has other plans for him, which never gets explained. But again, the rest of the content takes place on the Titans tribe, where we do get this funny moment between Ferris and Raymond in the ocean, where they just yell out their fake strategizing here. Ferris just openly yelling out that he has an idol, don't tell anybody, which was funny. This leads to a pretty strange subplot of Ferris thinking Kelly has an idol for some reason, and ends up telling Kirby this, to where Kirby ends up saying that she's going to use this to her advantage, and ends up lying to Ferris about Kelly having an idol. Train paranoia for Ferris there. But anyway, we get to the reward challenge, which ends up being a head-to-head in the Survivor Spelling Bee. A challenge where they either race to the water and get coconuts to find the letters to spell out words related to the Mexican feast that they'll end up winning, which leads to this pretty fun moment here of Kelly saying she wants to be in the challenge, that she can spell, leading to Garrick saying we can all spell, only for Kelly to reveal that she can't spell as she doesn't know how to spell salsa, and they're constantly being confused over what letters she needs. But we do get some intrigue here from Mark ending up playing this like football and tackling winner and end up faking out people, but does end up actually giving them the win in this instance. But anyway, the Titans end up winning the challenge here either way. So the opposite ends up happening at the immunity challenge, which ends up being the tribal endurance challenge, with them having to hold up the barrels, which we've seen in the past, where the Rebels finally win a challenge there, leading to a pretty insane series of events at the Titans tribe, where right away we do see Eileen talking about wanting to go Rebel strong, and again tries to get Kirby and Ferris to agree to work together here, which they do obviously agree to do so, only for that to just dissipate almost instantly, with obviously both of them ending up deciding to go after each other, with Garrick initially getting this visibility spike saying that his number one enemy is still Kirby and that she stabbed him in the back. That's time to blindside her, where we do see him doing a lot of independent work and trying to get people on board with going for Kirby, which the amount of focus that Garrick ended up getting here made it pretty clear that he was the one that was probably going to go out in this instance. But here we see Raymond finally coming back to the show to make a pretty questionable decision here and leaking to Kelly that they're voting for Kirby and tells her to not play her idol, which obviously doesn't go over well, where Kelly just tells Kirby about this, obviously alerting Kirby to the fact that Ferris has turned on her, to where this ends up leading to Kirby being on this pretty big high ground here, talking about how this divide is all Ferris's fault, seemingly talking about it as if this is the start of their feud, when obviously she started their feud episodes ago at this point. But anyway, Kirby does decide to target Garrick here as expected, due to Ferris having an idol, which she does proceed to say that Garrick doesn't trust her or like her, never has, which is like, he did. You just betrayed him. He just lied to him and did things behind his back. Again, he literally had a scene earlier in the season saying that he cried over her betraying him. Again, this is just a ridiculous thing to say. But anyway, both sides end up obviously fighting for the votes of the Titans here, with them clearly leaning towards Kirby's alliance, with them saying that they have less numbers and saying that she's more trustworthy, which is absolutely false. I mean, Kirby is a terrible ally, someone that you cannot trust in the slightest, someone that is going to constantly make moves behind your back. Yeah, I think the fact that the Titans think this is definitely a testament to Kirby's social game. The fact that Kirby is able to make them trust her in comparison to Ferris, who again, they look at as schemy, despite the fact that Ferris has been almost nothing but a loyal player up to this point. But with that, Charles is finally on the show, being this episode's representative for the Titans tribe, and us seeing him do a lot of the brokering between the two sides, and we do see him proceed to just not tell Ferris anything, which should have made it clear to Ferris who they're siding with, though it doesn't seem like he picks up on that. But here we do get some strange strategy right before tribal of these plans that don't end up mattering, though we for some reason get some focus on them. We get Eileen and Ferris setting up a minority vote split, which again was weird to see here, as we've had this in the past where they just didn't bother showing it, yet here for some reason it made it on the show when it didn't end up mattering, along with the fact that we also see Kirby creating a plan to flush Ferris's idol by whispering over to Kelly, by telling Kelly to play her idol after the votes are cast, which again, decent plan here to try to flush Ferris's idol, but again, it's something that doesn't lead to anything. But anyway, we get the tribal itself, which is a pretty fun one where you get a lot of bickering between Ferris and Garrick and Kirby over who got PETA out, which was just kind of a dumb argument, along the fact that we talk about who started the feud, which it was Kirby. But also we see Kirby being upset at Eileen for creating this fake Rebel Strong plan, which was actually real, but she doesn't know that. But here we do see Garrick picking up on the fact that the votes are probably going on to him telling Eileen about this, for Eileen then proceeds to tell Ferris to play his idol on Garrick, only for Ferris to not do so, which I know there's a lot of criticism over this move at the time. However, I do stand by Ferris not playing the idol in this position. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, if he had all the information in the world, he should play the idol and take out probably Kirby, if not one of the rebels. But the thing is, he doesn't have all the information. And I think considering the information that he had at this point, which, to be fair, there's some that he should have been able to read. He should be able to read the fact that the Titans aren't on his side, but he simply doesn't. But considering the information that he had and the fact that he still thought there was a chance that the Titans were on his side, and he didn't know for sure that the votes were going on to Garrick, and that even if the votes were on to Garrick, he would still be in a technical minority coming into the following round. And even if the Titans were against him, he would be in a technical minority the following round, so where he would probably need his idol to get through that anyway. I do stand by the move of not playing the idol, again, based on the information that he has, though even then, I don't think it was that active of a decision. I just didn't really think he never even intended on playing the idol at all. But here we obviously see the Garrick votes coming out and Eileen saying, "I told you so," into Garrick getting voted out in this instance, with Eileen instantly saying to Kirby, "I didn't write your name down," which felt like pretty bad play there. I get what she's doing, obviously, and the fact that she now knows she's in the minority and she's trying to appease to Kirby, who she knows is in a power position, but she's doing so openly at Tribal to where everyone just knows what she's doing, and it's also just kind of a sketchy thing to do and showing how easy it is for her to turn against her own allies. But either way, we do end up losing Garrick here, who I loved on the show. I personally really like Garrick. I thought he was this fantastic straight man for the show, with his reactions to Kelly being extremely humorous, and even beyond that, he seemed to be a pretty good player, shockingly to me, where again, coming into the season where we saw him being this loss prevention officer and talking about catching rats and everything, like, I thought of that as a joke. I thought he was going to be this massive joke that would be a big flame out early on, have these terrible reads in the game, but no, he had these great reads on the game. He seemed to know what was going on at most instances, where again, he called out the fact that the Cuddle crew were throwing the challenge. He called out the fact that it was Kelly that messed up the split vote. He called out the fact that he was getting the votes in this instance. Again, like, he seemed to have really good reads in the game, and that's something I do very much respect from Garrick here. So really, I don't feel like he does that much wrong outside of, again, just kind of maybe being a bit too blatant with how much he's annoyed at Kirby for turning against him. But I think considering his boot here, I think he played a pretty solid game on this season, him being a player that I would personally like to see back, even though I don't know if that'll really happen. But now for episode 10, which ends up being a largely controversial episode here, with this being the first episode that kind of felt like this retraction back to the very twist-heavy Australian Survivor that we previously had. But we all started off with the Rebels tribe, where they barely get any content in this episode, and the only content they do get is this superfluous segment about Rihanna being on the bottom and her trying to get back with Caroline and Kitty and throw Mark under a bus, which just ends up getting regurgitated the following episode anyway, so again, all that was pointless. But and early on in the episode, we do get the immunity challenge, where again, this ends up being a strangely structured episode with the lack of a reward challenge, and concerning the later twist, where it ends up being another obstacle course with the Titans getting a massive lead, having a 3-0 lead in the throwing section by the time the Rebels even show up, only for Jaden to then sink every single shot in a row, which was pretty insane to see, meaning that the Titans end up going to Tribal. Though during the challenge, we do end up seeing Eileen campaigning the vow against Ferris while on the bench, clearly as a self-preservation move there, but one that does again largely come off as desperate in this position, which kind of harms her perception in the game. game. But also, I do question her overall target of Ferris, where again, Eileen knew that Ferris had an idol, so it's strange they are trying to get the votes on the person that does have the idol when the other side has the opportunity to split. But interestingly, though, we do see Kirby's Alliance doubt the fact that he has an idol due to him not playing it the previous round, which was a bit humorous, where it does lead to this kind of pointless subplot of Eileen working as a double agent to get information about Ferris's idol, the OG Titans, which again didn't really lead to anything. But anyway, on the Titans tribe, we do get a lot of focus on Eileen, obviously in reaction to the previous vote, where we do see Kelly being annoyed at her for having voted for her the previous night, while we see Eileen's continuing to pretend like she didn't vote for Kirby as a way to protect her, which is just saw through with Kirby ignoring her initial request for a chat, and we see them just stop talking when Eileen joins the conversation. Again, make it pretty clear that Eileen is in the firing line here, where the plan is to split the vote between Ferris and Eileen, but tell them that it's Raymond in an attempt to flush an idol, though obviously it was just assumed that Eileen was more than likely going home here, as why would Ferris not play his idol in this instance? And what do you know, Ferris does consider not playing his idol, only for Raymond to convince him to play it anyway, which again, I assume he would have gone through playing it, as it would have been really dumb if he didn't. This leads to Raymond finally getting confessional, I believe his first confessional since the premiere, where here he says that he's sad that Eileen's probably going home tonight, as she doesn't have a future, which again, like, was this kind of mean comment here from Raymond. Again, very strange that he was invisible for so long just to come back to the show just to make a comment like this, and again, very rich coming from Raymond as well. But right before Tribal, we do get Winna talking about his idol once again, which comes out of left field, along the fact that Ferris talks about wanting to take out Winna, so I wonder if any of this will be relevant. Oh, we find out about a plan from Charles, and that he says that he plans on toying with Ferris and Eileen at Tribal, a plan that just felt unnecessary and really mean-spirited in the way they come for them, where, again, it's implied that this was a plot to flush their idol, though really just in general was not a good look, made them come off as cocky, and just in general pretty unlikable to the audience, and again, didn't really have much game ramifications anyway. But anyway, we get the Tribal with still 30 minutes left in the episode, where, considering the promotion coming into this week about this being the biggest Tribal yet, it felt pretty obvious they were going to do some sort of twist to recreate the magic of episode 7, Heroes vs. Villains, along with the fact that obviously this was the first episode of the week, which they needed a big event to promote in the commercials. So again, it made sense that that's what they were going to do here. And while this did end up being fun TV, I will say this did feel very artificial in how all this happened, with this being the first time this season that felt like production kind of overstepped its boundaries. But initially at Tribal, we do see Charles and Val, again, come off negatively here, with them enacting their plan of calling out Eileen for wanting to work with them, while she also says that she wanted to be rebel strong. And we have Valeria saying that she's disappointed in her, and that she was fighting for her, aka she was part of the split vote plan on her and wanted her to go out after Ferris played his idol, which was always the plan, where, again, this definitely comes off extremely hypocritical there, while we also end up seeing them calling out Ferris for being a terrible leader that doesn't listen to anybody, and talk about how he can't provide the loyalty and trust that Kirby's Alliance provides, which is super rich. But anyway, this is where we get JLP revealing that tonight is a little different, saying that your vote is not guaranteed and that you'll have to earn your votes in a challenge that's outside, where the top 3 will be the only ones to vote and are also immune. And again, while this did provide some great TV, this is a terrible twist. Again, feel like a modification of the Baden twist from Brains versus Brawn. Now, not as bad in the sense that at least 3 people got the vote here and not 1, but also worse in the fact that the person that gets to vote out here actually gets eliminated. Where, again, straight up, I think this is probably one of the most unfair twists in the history of the show. For a while, again, most of this season has come off as production just allowing the players to play. I think this was just such a major instance of production kind of just going back to their old ways of making these really ridiculous twists just for the sake of having something good to promote in the commercial. But anyway, the challenge itself ends up having them build frame with blocks and have to throw bags through that frame. The first 3 to land 3 shots end up keeping their votes, with Eileen ending up being the first to finish here, already changing up what was going to happen for the night. Then we see Kirby win, meaning meaning that the final person to win here will end up radically changing how this tribal plays out, thus seeing Ferris win here, which in essence obviously just massively screws over the Titans that should have been in this great position coming into this tribal with no chance of going home, and turning that into them being in immediate danger here, to where while it was a great comeuppance considering how cocky they acted at tribal, this all is still just an entirely game-breaking twist that is entirely unfair. And while like people like to claim that, oh, twists have always been part of Australian Survivor, it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that it's good. And again, while I do think this brought entertainment to the show, I do think it comes at a cost of the integrity of the game. But again, either way, we get to the rest of the tribal where Winner reveals to his alliance now that he has the idol and tries to get the votes on him, obviously, though he does so really terribly here, to where it actually was kind of humorous that he just openly says to the opposing side that he was the first one to betray them and that he can't see himself working with them down the road. That just made it obvious that he was trying to goad them into voting for him. But we do get to the vote itself, where Kirby ends up voting for Raymond, though we don't actually see where Ferris and Eileen end up voting for outside of hearing them change their target to Charles when he was being a dick earlier in Tribal, to where I did spend this entire segment of the show just kind of wondering, why aren't they splitting the vote? Like, that just seems like the obvious thing to do. And what do you know? Good on them. They split the vote. Sure, Winna ends up playing the idol for himself, only for it to be a split between him and Charles, leading to Charles getting voted out on the revote. Again, a spectacular downfall here, but when that, again, I don't know if it was worth the loss of integrity to the game here. And with that, we lose Charles, who I think is up for debate as the most screwed over player in Australian Survivor history. I mean, really, I think it's between him and Phil, probably, for me, where again, like in comparison to Baden, I think Baden at least had a chance to come back in. When it comes to Charles, I mean, both him and Phil were pretty safe coming into their tribals, only for a wonky twist to happen there. And then I think I would personally actually give the edge to Charles in the sense that, or at least with Phil, at least they were voted out by a group that encompassed the majority of their tribe, while Charles was voted out here by the minority, simply because production handed them a twist that allowed them to vote him out. So again, definitely one of the most screwed over players. Now, outside that, there's not much to really say. Again, he was barely on the show outside of him getting an intro package in the premiere and then him getting a few confessionals before he gets voted out, to where again, I don't feel like we really got to know him that well. Now he is a super fan of the show, and again, it obviously sucks to see a super fan go out in this way, especially when it seemed like they were playing a pretty decent game. But when it comes to the entertainment of the show, I do think him going here was probably the best option, considering the minimal storyline that they gave him. But now for episode 11, which ends up being one of the weaker episodes of the season, but still not entirely bad. I mean, we do start off with the Titans tribe, where we do get Valeria's perspective of the reaction to Tribal, to where we do see her being upset at Eileen for not flipping when she gave her the chance, which is like, what does that mean? You were voting her out. Though we do see Eileen explain this by saying that she didn't want to show that she's a flipper, which is like, I mean, the opposing group already looks at you as a flipper, so I don't know if that really helped any. But again, Eileen gets propped up as this big target if they were to lose immunity. And what do you know, we get to the immunity challenge, which ends up being an endurance challenge where the last person standing ends up winning it for their tribe, where the challenge ends up being between Eileen and Rihanna, ironically the two the most in danger on their respective tribes. And what do you know, Eileen wins it, which is a pretty good moment for her. I mean, she gets emotional, definitely comes off as a likable underdog there. But again, with that, we spend most of the episode on the Rebels tribe, where we do start off with Mark attempting to reconcile with Kitty and Caroline, putting the middle-aged mafia back together, to where they initially talk about splitting the vote on Rihanna and Alex, with them landing on taking out Alex here due to the fact that they think they can work with Kirby at the merge and would need Rihanna for that, which again, funny how they literally just swap their opinion of Rihanna over the last few rounds. But all this seems to be for naught, as we do see Caroline then say that Mark is on the bottom and he's just scrambling, to where we find out that she actually wants to target Mark, as she wants to control the narrative of how Viola left, which doesn't end up mattering. But I think more importantly, she does say that Mark will be dangerous if he makes it to the merge due to his connections with Valeria and Winna, to where it did seem like this Mark vote was going through for most of this round, to where you get shown that Mark is pretty aloof to this plan, fully thinking that the Mafia is back together, being the first major ding to his edit, which had been pretty spotless up to this point, despite his suboptimal gameplay in the last few rounds, where we do even see Caroline forgetting the fake plan in front of Mark, which should have been this really big tell, though he doesn't seem to really think much of it. But right before Tribal, we do see Caroline Eden finally talk, with Eden finally being told the plan, only for him to push back against it, saying that now is not the right time, and the easy thing to do is just to vote Alex out. So it does seem like Eden had a pretty major influence here in getting the vote off of Mark, though it doesn't feel like the edit really hypes that up that much, which just in general, Eden's edit across the season was very strange, though where I think he clearly was one of the best players on the island and did get massive edit at points, though it felt like he was kind of under edit at moments where he should have gotten major edits like this round. But this ends up convincing Caroline to unravel the plan and now gets everyone to agree to just vote out Alex once again, leading to Jaden being confused over who he's voting for, with him saying he has no clue what's happening tonight, which is pretty Jaden of him. But anyway, we get the tribal where we do get a lot of whispering here from Mark asking Jaden who he's voting for, only for Jaden to then proceed to ask Kitty who he's voting for, saying that he thought he was voting for Mark, leading to Mark finally picking up on the fact that he's being left out of a lot of conversations, and leading to this big chain of whispers confirming the plan, which would have just been Alex getting voted out here anyway. That is until JOP reveals that tonight is a little different once again, saying that no one is going home, and instead, any player that gets votes this round will end up drawing rocks for who goes to the Titans tribe. A pretty inoffensive twist here. I mean, again, just another situation of one person getting swapped to the other tribe, just finding a new mechanic for that. But we do get a last second scramble here that leads to all the votes going on to Ree and Alex, with the majority wanting to make sure that Mark doesn't get swapped over to give him more power on the other side. Oh, while Rihanna openly says that she wants to be sent over as she has allies on the other side, which you would think would make them not want to send you over. But again, there's not really many other good options anyway. But Alex ends up drawing the rock to send him over, which, to be fair, probably pays better dividends anyway. Taking us to episode 12, where you start off obviously with the reaction of Alex getting swapped over, with this reigniting the rivalry between him and Kelly, but us seeing some bickering between the two. And we do finally see Ferris getting excited in the background. Again, all really funny. This is even still a feud, considering the fact that she's the sole person that saved him in the game. But this is when we do get another pretty big Kelly segment here, of this being her son's birthday, and we get this really sympathetic editing here of her making a heart in the sand with shells, only for us to see Ferris and Alex again laughing in the background. So again, this ends up being a pretty funny little segment there, though as for strategy of it all, we do see Alex ending up being a pretty solid number for Ferris's alliance here, with Kirby being upset at this being the case, despite the fact that she's the person that burned Alex to the point where he did join Ferris's alliance. But anyway, Kirby does create a plan here of wanting to get rid of Raymond first, something that Kelly instantly doesn't want to do, and ends up defending Raymond in this situation, with Kirby getting upset that she's not willing to vote with the alliance, with Val again coming off negatively here and her chastising Kelly for playing the game emotionally. Again, ironic coming from the person that becomes hellbent on getting revenge for Viola. And just all of this, though, is a terrible move from Kirby's alliance. Now, straight up, it's obviously a terrible move from Kelly as well, for her to completely go against her own group. But for Kirby in particular, she should know that this is how Kelly is going to react to things. And this is just her completely turning Kelly away for no reason. I mean, you have the options of Eileen or Alex still to target, who Kelly would be more amendable to voting for. Yeah, them being so resolute in voting for Raymond here, which I get in the sense that obviously Raymond is the safest vote of the bunch, but it's not worth turning away your own number, a number that makes you the majority to begin with. But following this, we do get the tribes being gathered with no challenge at the set. But this is where we get the reveal of another twist. This one actually being a pretty good one, though, where the players are given a choice of picking between having a feast where both tribes are able to freely talk to each other, or get a chance at an idol back at camp, which I thought was a pretty fun dilemma here that again ended up paying some pretty major dividends in this episode, where we do have seen most of the players pick the feast, which did add this interesting dynamic here of many of this game's bigger players being able to communicate here before the merge. But this is where we do get a lot of focus on Val, with her talking about wanting to find out what happened to Viola, and we see her talking to Kitty, and Kitty tells her that Viola was plotting against her, and talks about Mark tried to blindside Caroline, and Val says that she has a terrible lying face, and that you crossed my girl and you're gonna go next, which, I mean, sure, but, and Kitty wasn't lying here. I mean, that is the truth. Again, it's not the way the edit portrays it, but it does portray it as if Valeria is right in this situation, but again, she's wrong. Oh, well, we also get a lot of content surrounding Kelly, where Kelly and Kitty end up talking, where Kelly ends up proceeding to leak pretty much her entire tribe dynamic to her, talking about how her alliance now hates her and how she's on the outs due to calling them out on their bullshit, and that she's gonna have to flip on her alliance. and tells them to beware of Kirby. All of this making Kirby now realize that Kelly is more of a liability than an asset, which straight up she always was. So again, the fact that Kelly even made it as far as she did here is pretty insane, considering the fact that she literally flips the vote on Tobias earlier on the season. She should have just been the boot immediately following that, but it's because Kirby is this insane strategic player that she is in making these very bizarre decisions in my mind that we had Kelly survive as long as she did. Anyway, we do get the idol hunts, where it ends up being the only scene that we get from the original Rebels tribe of seeing Rihanna, Mark, and Eden being the ones to go idol hunting, to where Rihanna ends up finding it, which ends up putting Mark in a lot of danger here, as Rihanna was the obvious target if they had gone to tribal, though they don't go to tribal, so it doesn't matter. Oh, we then get to the Titans tribe, where this is where we get to get a bit more intrigue, where Eileen, Ferris, and Alex are the three to go idol hunting, all being from the same alliance, meaning there's less of a scramble here, though finally the clue itself does literally just tell them it's in the shelter. So while we do see Ferris finding it pretty early on, we do then proceed to see him make a somewhat questionable decision here in not taking the idol for himself, instead trying to guide Alex into finding it. So where we do get some humor from him trying to point Alex to the idol and him still not picking up on it, which is some pretty big dodo content for him, though eventually he does end up finding it. And really, I'm not sure what to make of this move for Ferris, where giving an idol to Alex does a couple things. Obviously, it does make Alex a bigger target for the opposing side, where having a bigger shield for Ferris is something that's obviously good. And also, we learn that Ferris doesn't fully trust Eileen long term, to where I do think avoiding her having the idol was also pretty good. Well, also, again, Ferris having two public idols would have probably been too big of a threat in the game. But, I mean, one, why even go on the idol hunt to begin with? But even beyond that, I do think allowing Alex to have an idol does feel questionable in the fact that Alex isn't as secure for your alliance. And we do actually later see him use the idol against his alliance. So where, again, it's just a bit of a strange move. It's not one I necessarily fully disagree with, because I definitely do see the pros and cons of the move. I just feel like it's a very complex decision. I don't think there really is a super right answer here, though I think my initial instinct would have been just to get the idol. And play it instantly. But next up we get to the mutagens, where strangely we don't end up seeing any of the reaction to who found the idol, which I found extremely strange, to where you would think that there'll be big reactions to Rihanna in particular finding the idol. But anyway, the challenge itself ends up being a pretty physical one of you having to get 3 balls to the goal, while obviously you can wrestle each other along the way. And the Rebels end up demolishing this challenge here, to the point where we get this very humorous visual of Jaden just being able to hold on to both Winna and Raymond, allowing for Mark to get an easy point. And again, it's just an easy Rebels win, to where on the Titans tribe, we do see Kirby now say that her plan is to now vote out Kelly, where, again, I get her wanting out Kelly, as Kelly's an unreliable number and wanting her out before the merge, but this is dumb, as the initial concept is, just getting everyone on board to vote out Kelly, make it a unanimous vote. The problem is that this largely relies on both sides agreeing to vote out Kelly, which again, Ferris has already shown himself to be willing to take opportunities like this to take a strike at Kirby. Again, conveniently, he just doesn't in this situation, where straight up, I think Ferris not taking the opportunity is also a mistake from his point of view, as Kirby is someone that should be untrustworthy at this point, to where you can never work with her moving forward, which again, works out for him, as they do end up repairing their relationship. But this is just such an easy opportunity to take Kirby out of the game, which also would have just completely nullified any of the following content, where we get Kirby attempting to flush Ferris and Alex's idols, again, further showing how untrustworthy she should be to Ferris. But we do see her telling Winna and Scott to get Ferris paranoid. We see her plotting with Val to talk about flushing idols at Tribal to get them to play them, all of which doesn't matter and doesn't end up happening, though, again, just showing how much Kirby is not really on Ferris's side, to where again, all Ferris needed to do for this vote here is get his alliance to vote for someone on Kirby's side. And if that's the case, they just go home when, again, Kelly's not on board with the Kirby side of things anymore. And again, no matter who she votes for, you have enough votes to tie to where you'll win out on the revote, considering Kelly is the person the opposing side is voting for. And even if that's not the case, then Kelly's gonna vote against Kirby's alliance on the revote. So either way, you had the shot at Kirby's alliance, and he just simply doesn't go through with it here. Now, beyond that, we do get a bizarre segment before Tribal of Kelly asking Raymond to hunt for an idol for her as payback for her essentially blowing up her game for him, to which we literally just see Raymond just stumbling around the woods and even just giving up at a point. They're just staying in the woods the entire time, which was just so strange. But anyway, we get the Tribal, where again, we do see Kirby and Val going through their plan, and while we do get some funny faces from Ferris, nothing really comes from it. Though we do get some more negative content for Val, Val, where Kelly ends up saying that she's playing a strategic game, only for Val to mock that she's saying her and strategic game in one sentence and calls her delusional. And again, all this, not a good look for Val. Also just a very bad indicator about her potential jury management, though. But anyway, we get to the vote where Val does get a great voting confessional here and telling Kelly that her most strategic move in this game is getting herself voted out tonight. But no idols end up getting played, and Kelly's obviously voted out. But that's not it for this episode, as we do get probably one of the greatest exits from Tribal in the history of the show, where right away we do see Kelly saying that she has something to say and walks up to JLP, only for JLP to tell her that you have to go grab your torch. But this is where we lead up to the reveal that she says that she's a psychologist, which obviously mind blows the entire cast. Is again, how? But then we see her almost proceed to leave without even getting her torch snuffed. And even when she proceeds to leave, she goes the wrong way. And again, all of this just being a complete disaster. Now, I will say, in a way, it felt like Kelly kind of hamming it up a bit, but this was still just super fun to see. This massive Dodo content for her on her way out. And again, with that, we do lose Kelly, who was such fun TV on this season. I mean, she's a really insane character, probably one of the biggest characters we've ever seen on Australian Survivor, especially from a pre-merge perspective. I mean, she just brought so much chaotic energy to the show that just led to so many humorous moments throughout her run, where, well, again, she's a terrible player, probably one of the worst Australian Survivors ever seen. Now, I don't think she's the worst of the worst, but again, she's definitely up there. But again, the entertainment value that she brought and the fact that she made it as far as she did is still pretty amazing coming in this season, where I very much expected her to be the first boot. But now for episode 13, which is the merge episode, though we do start off with the scene at the Titans tribe just to get the reaction to Kelly being a psychologist, along with Val talking about wanting to get revenge once again. So I wonder what's going to happen here. But again, we get the arrival at a challenge, with it being an individual reward challenge, revealing that we're merging at 14, which, and for English language Survivor, is a new record for the biggest merge we've ever had, but it's something that I don't actually mind. I think for Australian Survivor, obviously the cast is bigger, it is a longer season. I think through that, having a bigger merge just makes sense. Now, if this was Survivor US, which only has like an 18-person cast, and yeah, merging at 14 would be ridiculous, but with a 24-person cast, I think merging at 14 was just kind of inevitability. I'm kind of surprised they haven't done it already. So again, I don't personally mind it here, but it is here where Eden does declare himself dateable, which I'm kind of surprised made the show, because that's an extremely niche reference to where I wonder myself if even the production team knew what he was referring to. But either way, we do get a lot of focus here on Val and her saying that her and Mark are going to be a power couple and go after those that went for Viola, which did have me convinced that Mark and Valeria were going to be running a show together at this point. Obviously that didn't happen, but we do get to a reward challenge. We're mixing that with the fact that obviously Valeria has been getting pretty by the numbers Australian Survivor winner edit up to this point. It did make me pretty convinced that they were going to be running the show, which obviously didn't happen. But we do get the reward challenge, which has them doing the endurance challenge of having to bounce a ball on a bow, to where the reward is the set for life reward, which means that they get $5,000 for 12 months, which is still ridiculous, along the fact that they also get a night in a bed at camp, while also getting front row tickets to Tribal as a spectator, aka safety without power, which is not necessarily good. I do find it funny how they added this to reward, seemingly because they just didn't want to deal so many votes, I guess. Like, it was just kind of weird that was there. But anyway, Valeria obviously wins, because obviously. And I did find it strange also that the immunity challenge later in the episode ends up also being an endurance challenge. This one being a bit more catered to the men, with it involving you having to use your legs to keep a ball in a chute. And it comes down to Winna and Jaden, with Jaden making a comment towards the end saying that the immunity necklace looks girly, where he just drops out, giving Winna immunity, which again was just weird, but very Jaden of him. But anyway, we do spend a lot of the episode obviously focusing on the Titans' point of view, where Caroline talks about needing to keep the OG Titans together, where she has a plan of picking up Rihanna and Alex to get the majority to target Ferris, despite the fact that Ferris wasn't even really in this episode, which was very strange. That made it also very apparent this plan wasn't going to go through. But this is where we get Eden getting more content once again, and get strangely getting a lot of focus in these like more traditionally important episodes, but here talking about wanting to slowly dismantle other power structures by getting out their lieutenants, to which he ends up switching the vote onto Raymond instead. This is where we finally get Kirby's perspective thing, saying that no way she's going to vote out a rebel. Where we cut to Val saying now it's time for revenge, where she says getting rid of Viola was her dirty play and now's the perfect time. to take out one of Caroline or Kitty, which again, it's funny that they're doing this when Val herself doesn't even have a vote. But there is talk about taking out Kitty more so, as she is the bigger threat in immunity challenges, where essentially by the end of the episode, everyone but Caroline, Kitty, and Eden are on board. Though throughout the episode, we had also been getting content from Scott, who had talked about the last 24 hours have been wild, talking about how he's starting to feel homesick, and then starts to talk about how he plays with empathy and connections and had bonded with Kitty, and all this obviously just setting up his future quit, which straight up, I don't mind. Like, obviously, he recognized himself his deteriorating mental health and ends up pulling himself from the game. Something I don't have an issue with at all. And people usually get, like, super insulted when people quit on Survivor. But for me, again, it really doesn't matter that much. Where, I mean, truth be told, again, I was kind of annoyed with Sean's quit in 45, but not because he quit. Again, the general concept of quitting is not really this thing that bothers me. For me, it was more so how he framed his quit, where I feel like he was someone that quit because he kind of got spooked that he was going home. While I feel like with Scott here, again, that's not the case. I think he just genuinely assessed his mental health as something that was deteriorating and took himself out of the game, which I think is an admirable thing to do in the sense that he was able to have that much awareness to do so. Though I do think something that is a little bit more questionable is the fact that we do see Scott proceed to go to Kitty and tell her that the votes are coming for her, which, I mean, does lead to a lot of future drama. Though I could definitely get the criticism of him messing up other people's games on his way out. But again, like at the end of the day, not a major qualm for me. And again, it at least brought good TV here, where you see Kitty and Caroline obviously now knowing that a blindside's coming and proceeding to confront their fellow Titans, especially after Scott does throw Mark under the bus in particular. And this does lead to a lot of awkwardness between the Titans here, to where we do get this weird scene of Val putting on Nathan's jacket and Caroline being upset, saying that that's my jacket, which is not a particularly good look for Caroline. But this does lead to Eden now changing the vote up at the last second, telling everyone to just vote for Raymond instead of splitting the vote, while also going to Alex and tells Alex to play his idol on Kitty, because I guess that's a thing Alex would do. I mean, that was kind of random. Never brought up again on the show either, but either way, we get the tribal where Val ends up having to sit on the jury bench and gets no questions, which probably better for her during the following tribal. But anyway, Kitty clearly thinks that she's going home here and says, well, I might as well go out fighting, where she ends up bragging about how much money she makes for some reason. But this is where we get Scott revealing that he wants to leave the game, which, again, I did find it refreshing how supportive this cast seemed to be of him, where outside of GLP initially being a bit confused, we do see Kirby voice her support of him, despite the fact that, like, Kirby's the most affected by this. Like, she's losing one of her closest allies in the game, yet she's supportive of his decision. We have Eden calling him brave, and again, it was just so refreshing to see the show not chastise him here in the way that Survivor US would typically do. But obviously, there ends up being no vote here because Scott decides to leave the game, which, again, can be looked at as lame for a merge episode, though I didn't find it too damning considering how good the content surrounding it was. But again, with that, we do lose Scott, and I personally do really like Scott. I was actually kind of disappointed to see him obviously leave the game this way, where he's a player that seemed to have a lot of potential. I mean, he seemed to be very good socially, where people just really liked him and seemed to be playing the middle pretty well. And I do think if he had stayed in the game, I think he could have been a very dangerous player down the road. But obviously that doesn't end up happening here. But still, again, I thought Scott was a pretty likable presence. I mean, while he wasn't like super wrong in the show, he actually got more confessionals than you would think he would. And again, if this was Survivor US, I think they would have just completely purpled him. And again, I think the edit treated him a lot better than you would expect considering his quit, to where, again, I just found his overall role on this season a bit refreshing, and how the edit didn't dunk on him in a position where they probably could have. Anyway, with that, we get to episode 14, where we start off with Caroline being emotional over being shafted by Mark and Val once again, and thinking that they're screwed, where she tells Kitty that she can't even sleep next to him, and says that she's taking it personally and calls him an asshole, and all this, again, not great look for Caroline, who I think definitely moving forward, you could definitely tell her sinking jury chances throughout these following episodes. But we see her and Kitty go on the campaign trail, with it largely coming off as pretty ineffective, with them looking extremely desperate here, with Kitty's actions at the previous tribal also seeming to burn some of her connections as well, though it is here where we see Kirby talking about making an alliance with Rihanna, Val, Winna, and Mark, and also adding in Jaden as a 6, being set up at the very beginning of the episode, make it pretty clear this wasn't going to be the majority by the end of the episode, which really starts this really dynamic post-merge phase of the game, where we had these constantly shifting alliances from round to round, which was pretty insane to see. But we do get to the immunity challenge, which ends up being a basic endurance challenge once again, of holding onto a rope where they have to move up over time, though it does come down to Eileen and Rihanna once again, with Rihanna pulling it out, starting her rise of threat level from being looked at as a pretty big physical threat moving forward. But here we do see Val talking about wanting to do do just the same plan again of voting out Kitty, which again was clearly not happening at this point, with it instantly flipping after Kitty ends up confronting Valeria, leading to her shifting the vote onto Caroline instead, which is obviously the optimal play here in the case of an idol. But this is where we get content from Rihanna with her talking about how she's close to Caroline and Kitty, but also has Kirby as her ride or die and ends up having this dilemma here of which side to go with, to where we do see Rihanna telling Caroline that she's closer to her than Val and doesn't want to just follow what Kirby does, leading to her agreeing to vote for Mark. But obviously her vote alone is not enough in this situation, to where we see Caroline and Kitty talking about needing to bring in numbers, talking about working with Ferris, to where we see her going to Ferris and telling him that she's targeting Mark, but also is against Val and Winna, to which I did love Ferris's response to this, saying that he's so happy that they wanted Winna out, which is like not actually what she said, but again, obviously changing the vote here onto a vote against Winna, I guess because he wants revenge for Garrick, because everyone wants revenge on this season, but also because Winna is close to Mark and is also a decent all-around threat, to where in general I do think this is a pretty strong move for Ferris to be taking advantage of Caroline and Kitty's desperation here and sniping Winna from the game while also keeping in Mark and Valeria for Kitty and Caroline to have an opposition as well, to where again I think this is a pretty good move and does lead to Ferris and Caroline's groups working together here for this vote, though together they only still have 6 in a group of 13. And while Rihanna and Alex are floaters during this round that they could have picked up, we do see them decide to not tell them here and allow the votes to be split, with Rhea already being on board for voting out Mark, while they proceed to lie to Alex and tell him to vote for Valeria, which allows them to pull off a 6-5 to 1-1 plurality vote, which was cool to see, though I think that aspect of it is a questionable move, again, for particularly in not telling Alex about this plan, where I think it is something that burns Ferris's relationship with Alex, adding to the reasons why he flips down the road, him just not being looped in on plans when he easily could have been. Anyway, we get to Tribal, where Winna does come off as really overconfident, obviously, but a lot of the drama here does surround the Val, with her talking about how she's voting for the weakest link in the tribe and the person that doesn't deserve to play this game, which is just terrible jury management from her. But Val does end up voting for Caroline, saying that you voted my girl Viola, so I think you should go home, which is her playing emotionally, despite criticizing Caroline for playing emotionally. But either way, again, Winna is taken out here in a pretty big blindside, to where I personally liked Winna on this season. I thought he was a very humorous kind of dodo figure on this season, to where, well, in actuality, I think he was actually playing a decent game. I do think his just nonchalant way of speaking just led to a lot of humor for me, to where while I don't personally need to ever see him play Survivor again, I felt like he was a decent character for the one season he's on here. Anyway, we get to episode 15, where you see Caroline and Ferris solidify their group, talking about working together moving forward, all while Caroline talks about being done with Mark. And we see them proceed to have a very rocky conversation, which again, none of this ends up lasting. But here you see Caroline being hurt by Valeria's comments, with Val again doubling down on this, saying that she is the weakest because she takes everything personally, which again, literally the person that's all about revenge. Oh, we get this very cringy confessional from Caroline talking about how Val fights wolves in Russia, but they're just puppy dogs and compared to her, which is her just trying too hard there. But anyway, this is where we get a lot of focus on Eden, who says that this is his opportunity to take control of the tribe and wanting the OG Titans to get back together. A pretty good move for Eden from my point of view, as he's really in the center of the Titan power structure. Sure, this would put him in such a prime position to really skate through the rest of the game. Well, obviously it's a decent move for Mark and Valeria as well, who are obviously in direct danger at this point, but it's a pretty bad move for Kitty and Caroline, who are the people that have to be convinced to go through this move. So while we do see Mark agree to this plan instantly, we do obviously see worry about getting Kitty and Caroline on board, which takes us to the reward challenge, where I wonder what's going to happen here. But the challenge itself ends up feeling very new era-y, and it being this 3-stage challenge that just wastes time on the show, but it turns out to be the car challenge, which felt very early in this season. Anyway, round 1 has them competing in teams of 6 to toss water into buckets. Round 2 has them working in teams of 3, to where they have to do this tossing challenge that was weirdly individual, but all 3 had to finish to move on, which Caroline ends up costing her team to win in this situation. All leading to round 3, where it's just a basic puzzle that Mark ends up winning here, obviously, and he proceeds to take Valeria alongside Caroline and Kitty. Who would have guessed? And while this does end up being a pretty effective play from Mark, it also ends up being a bit too obvious in what he's doing, to where obviousness in it ends up backfiring on him by the end. But anyway, on the reward itself, we do see Mark talking about how he has to glue this group back together because that's what he does as a former diplomat, with the show obviously giving him a lot of credit for this move here. Though it does start off a bit rocky, where you see Val saying that the reason she made the comment about Caroline is because she is an emotional player, to where we do get this funny shot of Mark's face when she says this. But again, Caroline ends up rebutting this by saying that Mark and you are emotional players, where Val says I'm not an emotional player, which again, they're all motivated by revenge, so it's like I would say that's pretty emotional. But either way, Caroline ends up saying that this is one of the most hurtful things anyone has ever said to me, to where we then see Val giving a pretty half-assed apology, to where while it does seem to ease the tensions, Caroline still isn't fully on board working with them until a bit later. But in essence, this also did kind of sink my opinion of Valeria on the show, to where coming into this, I had Valeria as my number one contender for really the entire season. So this is kind of the point where, for me, I just really did not see Valeria winning this game when she was making comments like this that people were being genuinely hurt by. To where this is kind of where Mark overtook her in my personal power rankings. But anyway, back at camp, we see Eden talking about how Jaden doesn't think about the game at all, and that he needs Jaden to start playing the game now, talking about teaching him the art of Survivor, and that he's the Survivor teacher out there, which felt very reminiscent to Rob C. and Matthew, which this content also ends up being kind of ironic by the end of the episode. But here we see Jaden talking about missing Winna and wanting revenge for him, says that players are underestimating him and that now he's going to start playing the game. So we do get to the immunity challenge, another endurance challenge, it being one where you have to bounce the idol on the pole. That really greatly favors someone like Jaden here, to where he obviously ends up winning. To where we get a comment from Eden talking about how he may have created a monster with getting Jaden to start playing the game. I guess winning immunity is an indication of that. But really, obviously, this sets up what ends up happening at Tribal, to which I think it does so a bit too obviously, to where for me, I was kind of expecting that to happen by that point. But either way, a pretty solid mini story arc for this season, something I think Australian Survivor typically doesn't do very effectively, where I think it focuses a lot more on the long-term story than these like smaller little arcs, which I think was something that was done pretty well here. Anyway, we do see Eden organizing the votes against Raymond, again keeping that strat of leaving in the bigger threats to go after each other, while also telling Ferris's alliance that they're splitting the vote on Rihanna and Val to flush Rihanna's idol to take out Val, which they seem to believe initially, with Eden even telling Rihanna to her face that she's getting votes, to where she was obviously going to play her idol during this round. Though this is where we do see Eden finally try to get Caroline on board, with Caroline initially rejecting this plan, not wanting to burn relationships with Ferris, which I do think for her personally, again, is the right call to make here, as well, sticking with Ferris here does give the Rebels the majority. They're so split amongst each other, to where, considering the fact that she doesn't have the greatest position within the Titan power structure, this is a move that does benefit, again, Eden a lot more so than it does Caroline. So I do understand her hesitancy with this plan, though she does end up agreeing to it by the end, where in typical Ferris fashion, we do see him watching other people talking, to where he suspects that something is going on here, and he ends up confronting Kitty and Caroline, proactively lying here, which I did like, and him telling them that he's been hearing Ray and Eileen's names, to which we proceed to see Kitty just saying I don't know a billion times like she always does. Despite seeming to suss them out, he doesn't really do anything before Tribal, but it does lead to a pretty explosive Tribal, to where here we see the Titans be a bit too open with how they're talking about each other, with Caroline and Val talking about how well the reward went, along with us seeing Eden and Mark whispering to each other, and Kitty talking about being tired of all the lying. But this is where we see Kirby saying to the other Rebels that there's been a shift, leading to Ferris telling the other Rebels to vote for Eden, outside of Alex, who has to get up and ask Ferris, to where, again, I think this is bad management of Alex from Ferris's point of view. Though I think Eden is a pretty perfect target in this situation. Someone that I think most of the Rebels can get on board with, where we also see some of the Rebels having closer ties to Caroline and Kitty. We see others having closer ties to Mark and Valeria. So while again, Eden is well positioned within the Titans themselves, he's not particularly well positioned from the outside of it. So where again, I think this was the perfect person to go for here. When we get to the vote itself, we do see all the Titans end up voting for Raymond, while all the Rebels end up voting for Eden, leading to a 6-6 tie, where Rihanna does end up playing her her idol here, which I know ends up being wasted in this instance, though I do think she made the right call in playing it, considering obviously the fact that the majority had openly told her that she was getting the votes, but along with that, this would save her from potential rock draw, which it did seem like we were pretty close to getting, where it is pretty insane that this vote just kind of comes out of nowhere to being one where people were willing to go to rocks for, where on the revote here, we do see most people sticking to their votes, despite most people not really having incentive to go to rocks, where, again, the dynamics were so fluid on this season to where there's not really a reason to go to rocks. The reason to go to rocks is only in a situation where the lines are so drawn that this is your only way out. So again, for seeing so many people just sticking to their votes, willing to go to rocks, is pretty insane. Only for us to get to the vote reveal itself, where we do see one person flipping. That person, again, unsurprising to me, being Jaden, which, again, had sussed out through how this episode had been edited, though this was a pretty insane move here. One that makes no sense from Jaden's point of view, where, again, like, he's literally the only Titan that doesn't have to go to rocks of the ones voting. He has immunity. It makes no sense for him to flip here. Yet, through him flipping here, it just shows him as a flipper in the game. Again, I think losing him respect from the people that he flipped on, while also putting him in a numbers disadvantage, at least on paper. Now, again, it kind of works out for him short-term-ish with him finding a spot following this. But again, I just think this was an outright dumb move, and him doing it under the guise of wanting revenge for Winna is even dumber, considering Raymond also voted out Winna. But again, this is an incredible vote off here, losing Eden on the revote here, and shockingly not being on the jury, which again must have been so upsetting for Eden in particular, who is obviously this massive super fan of the show. And that genuinely did shock me as well, where again, for me, I did not ever expect Eden would be someone to not even make the jury, considering his edit. Like, I could see him as the first juror, which again, this would have been a decent spot for the person to be voted out as the first jury, but not to be the person that just barely misses out on the jury. And with that, let's talk about Eden, who, again, I really liked on this season. I personally really like Eden. He's a super fan of the show. He's someone that plays the game very hard. He's someone that I think plays a pretty optimal game for most of the season. Like, unlike most other people on this cast, I feel like he's probably one of the only people that I don't actually disagree with any of the strategic decisions he made throughout the season. Now, while I do think his move to get the Titans back together is not one that he necessarily needed to make, where he was safer short term through not making that move, I do think for his long-term game, I do think it did greatly benefit him if he was able to execute on it. Though sadly, obviously, he wasn't. That's kind of what takes him out here. But I still think he plays a very, very strong game considering his placement. And beyond that, I thought he was fun on the show. Now, again, I do think he hams it a bit too much in terms of the movie quotes of it all, but I still find him to be a pretty likable personality and someone that having to see actually get on the show, considering he's someone that I believe has applied since season 1. So yeah, at least that was cool to see. But with that, we then get to episode 16, where we see no reaction to Jaden's flip somehow. Again, very strange. Not seeing the reaction from any of the Titans there, though we do all of a sudden just see him being involved in all the Rebels' plans and him being lumped in with the Rebels, which again shows it working out for him somehow, which again I guess is credit to him socially, but just funny how underdeveloped all of it is on the show. But anyway, we do get Ferris gloating about how he had textbook Survivor play the previous night, and we get focus on his relationship with Eileen, calling her a strategic partner who approves all of his strategies, making it very clear what was going to happen this episode. Oh, Kirby talks about having taken a step back at the merge, but says that Eileen is a concern to her as she has weight with Ferris, and talks about being bored of sitting back, also making it very apparent what's going to happen here. Though, truth be told, one of the few big moves from Kirby on the season that I actually do fully agree with. I do think this is the right call to make. And taking out Eileen, where again, taking out Eileen is something that allows you to work with Ferris, where Ferris needs you more in the game at that point, especially considering the lesser numbers of the Rebels. But also, it takes out someone that is coming for Kirby. We learned this from Ponderosa that Eileen also wanted Kirby out of the game. And I think Kirby taking the shot first here was just, again, the correct call all around for me. But this is where you see Kirby's relationship with Jaden, with her bringing him into her alliance, once again highlighting her social prowess here, and proceeds to create this plan to get all the Titans on board of voting out Eileen, where Kirby says that she needs to vote out Eileen without directly getting involved, which did make me worry that she was going to do the same thing she did in episode 3 of organizing this vote just to not vote with them in a position where it would easily just backfire on her anyway, to where thankfully she doesn't go through that part of the plan. But I will say, again, just how much this was set up early on in the episode did kind of make the rest of the episode kind of dull, just with how obvious this was going to go through. But anyway, we do get the Survivor auction here, which was a mostly mundane one, sadly. Though the first item itself ends up being popcorn, which Raymond ends up bidding $400 for and ends up getting it. And we do get a funny little moment from Raymond proceeding to bid $100 on every single item moving forward. But again, there were a couple fun moments from Val getting chicken parm and fries for only $120 and proceeds to give the beer to JLP. We see there being a box on the side, which Ferris goes $500 for, only for it to be a dental clinic, which leaves Ferris incensed there. But really, as a whole, not a particularly interesting auction, though through it, Raymond ends up finding an advantage in his popcorn with the reveal that it's the ultimate vote advantage that activates if you get voted out unanimously. To earn that position, your vote will become the sole determining vote of who goes home. And this advantage that I personally think sucks all around. I think it's terrible, obviously, for the player themselves, where it's something that's not really even worth going through with, as that puts you in such immediate danger where just one split vote can ruin this plan. So again, you're almost always incentivized to at least put one split vote in any situation. So again, I think it's obviously terrible for the player themselves, though I think it's also not particularly interesting TV. So while it's a new dynamic to the show of trying to paint the votes on you, I personally don't find that entertaining. While it does provide for a big moment that we'll later talk about, I feel like I personally would have just rather seen people dynamically organize votes against others instead of just trying to paint the target onto themselves. But anyway, we get to the immunity challenge, which ends up being a pretty typical stacking challenge. Pretty boring, though Eileen is in the lead for a lot of it, though ends up dropping her blocks at the last second, leading to Kitty winning instead. Obviously being set up this big dramatic moment of, oh, is Eileen gonna win? But then she doesn't. So again, it's just really obvious that Eileen is going home here. But we do get a lot of focus on Ferris and Caroline's relationship, where we do see them once again talking about working together, only for Ferris to agree to split the vote onto Caroline. Have Mark as his true target, and we see him trying to convince Caroline that he's saving her, while she obviously knows that the real plan is on Eileen, though this does end up leading to her starting to not trust that plan, make her come off paranoid and emotional once again, which is not a particularly good look for the jury there. But this is another instance of Ferris watching conversation and getting sussed out by Kitty and Caroline, where he interrogates them as he normally does, where Caroline ends up proceeding to tell him that she hasn't heard a single other name from her Titans group, which obviously makes Ferris even more suspicious here. So we see Ferris then confronting Kitty, who tells him that she promised the Titans to not say, making it obvious that they have their own plan, which was dumb. Outside of him just stopping the split vote and instead dumping the votes onto Mark at the end, not really much comes from this, where you get the tribal, which is a mostly mundane one outside of Alex getting pretty paranoid here, ends up faking out that he's going to play his idol. It was just an obvious Eileen vote, with Ferris being surprised. With Ferris surprisingly not being that upset with Kirby, with them having a playful comment as they leave tribal of him saying no more wedge, a phrase that Kirby had been saying, describing Eileen, making it pretty clear this is something they had already talked about, and that Eileen would need to go at some point. But anyway, with that, we do lose Eileen, and I really liked Eileen on this season. Yeah, I'm so disappointed how little her edit was, where while I do think the season as a whole did a pretty good job at balancing out its edit a bit more, I do feel like Eileen is someone that we just simply did not get enough of. Where while she was pretty present during a lot of the camp life scenes, it just felt like we saw very little of her perspective, especially after the merge, to where she literally gets zero confessionals after the merge, where all of her content is just her talking about Ferris, about strategies. And again, I think it's a shame that we didn't get more of her, considering she seems like a pretty competent player. Now, someone that I think was probably a bit too open with how strategic she was. Or again, it did seem like Ferris and Kirby were aware of the fact that she was probably going to try to take them out at some point down the road, which made her even more prime target at this point. But again, I think she's someone that does seem like a pretty competent all-around player, and someone I did like on this season, to where I would not be opposed to seeing her back at some point down the road. But with that, we then get to episode 17, which strangely starts off with Ferris and Kirby now working together again and being excited to work together, which was, again, really interesting to see how this dynamic ends up playing out on this season, them just being so on and off throughout a lot of it. But this is where we do see them formalizing a new alliance, which is essentially just the Rebels plus Jaden, though we then get content from Alex, with him talking about how he feels left out and is upset at Ferris for trying to work with Kirby, and that he doesn't feel part of the gang, which again, I think has been a long time coming at this point, where you could just tell throughout multiple instances that Ferris just kind of looks at Alex as an afterthought. But this is where Alex says that he needs to find a new alliance, where we see him talking to the OG Titans and decides to flip, which I don't think is a bad move from my point of view. I think Alex is already in a spot where it's tough for him to win, and I think him flipping here and making a move is something that he would probably need to do if he was going to gain any respect. I think the problem for me is the fact that he's a bit too obvious when doing this, where we do see Ferris noticing them walking off on their own, and that obviously just paints a bigger target on his back, which was not great. But I think the initial concept of the move, though, is the right call. But here we do see two sides now tied in numbers, leading to a Caroline and Kitty conversation where they talk about no matter what, they'll be friends, making it seem like one of the two is going to flip here. But why would they do that? They just got the numbers on their side. Again, it would be idiotic for someone to flip at this point. And what do you know? We see Kitty do that. Going to Kirby, and again, kudos to Kirby's social game and pulling in Kitty here. But we do see Kitty fully flipping here, which is just insane, to where Kitty should have no incentive for doing this, especially at this point where, again, they just got in a position where they're tied in numbers with an idol in play. Yet she flips here, talking about this as a move she doesn't want to do, but she feels like it's best for her personal game, when it's like, no, it's not. This just gives the Rebels the majority and while burning a relationship with the Titans. It just burns your jury chances. But either way, we get an immunity challenge here. It has them hanging upside down on a rope, which was a pretty intense one, where we get this massive showdown at the end between Alex and Rihanna, but Rihanna ends up winning here. But in the lead up to the vote, we do see Ferris wanting to target Val, wanting to just dump the votes onto her, where, again, surprisingly, Val becomes the bigger target than Mark at this point in the season, which I didn't even understand why that was the case. I think from Ferris's point of view, I can get it in the sense that obviously Val was close to Kirby and you want to separate that as quickly as possible. That's not really the explanation we get on the show. But this is where we do get Mark getting a lot of credit for what the Titans are doing, creating a plan of voting for Jaden in the case of an idol, obviously Jaden being a pretty safe vote in this situation, though this is where we see Kitty, again, ratting them out, where Jaden becomes aware of the votes on him, leading to him being pretty indignant here, talking about how he's upset as he's been prepping everything and people are using that against him, which is like, yeah, maybe he should be playing the game more. And this does lead to this tension between him and Caroline, where Jaden gets upset over her putting coconut in the rice, to which she calls him Lord Jaden, and Jaden calls her ungrateful and says that he didn't like that comment, which, I mean, again, I think is bad play from Jaden, but also bad play from Caroline, again, showing how little respect people have for her. But here we do see Alex going up to Ferris and asking him what the plan is, only for Ferris to obviously confront him about him flipping, which, again, I do think this is entirely Ferris's fault for Alex flipping here. Again, I think Ferris just simply did not manage Alex well enough across these last few rounds. And even beyond that, he ends up being indignant himself in this situation, where Alex says that he flipped because Ferris started working with the people that they were against, only for Ferris to say, what is this, high school? And he can't deal with the stupidity, when it's like, again, I think you are mostly at fault in this situation. But either way, we do see Alex and Raymond proceeding to have a conversation, which was interesting, in that Raymond does reveal that he thinks it's time to make a big move and that he doesn't want to be a goat taken to the end. So he ends up proceeding to tell Alex that he'll be willing to vote for him as long as the vote's not on Ferris, with Alex relaying this back to Mark, which leads to the big move made at Tribal, though I think this is an interesting move from Raymond. Now, again, I don't love the idea of him being the sole person to flip. As I've been mentioning before, like, I think being the sole person to flip just typically leads to you losing credibility with the people you flipped on, and then also burning their jury votes. Though I do think for Raymond, again, he's in this non-winning position to begin with. I don't think anyone really respects him already. So I feel like him making a move in this instance, and one that doesn't even sink his own side in taking out Jaden, is something that I actually don't hate. As again, I don't think he's in a winning position to begin with, so why not just try something? And again, it leads to a lot of fun in the show as well, where we get the Tribal, where we do get a lot of bickering between Kirby and Alex, talking about the difference between being flexible and being a floater, and all this was pretty stupid. But we do also get more fighting between Ferris and Alex, with Alex saying that your ass gets jealous of the amount of shit your mouth talks, which was pretty funny. But anyway, we get Mark and doing some pretty good work here, whispering to Raymond and telling him to vote for Jaden, which Raymond gets on board with, while also leaking the plan to vote for Val to Alex, which would have been a pretty solid play here if it not been for the fact that Kirby was literally watching them and proceeds to tell the rest of her alliance that fact, which leads to them switching their vote onto Alex at the last second, which again could have led to a 5-5 tie here, where we do get to votes where Alex ends up playing his idol on Valeria, which again at this point was clearly an incorrect idol play, only for it to turn out Valeria got one vote, which reveals that someone from the Titan side of things didn't get on board with the plan, with it turning out to be Rihanna again, which again somehow she ends up not picking up on what her allies are doing and messes up the plan once again. So we get the vote between Jaden and Alex, a 5-4 vote, where with Raymond flipping, Jaden is taken out, which is a pretty insane result for this tribal. Again, another really fun round all around, but with that, we do lose Jaden, and Jaden is someone that I just find to be a bit of an enigma on this season. I just find the way he plays the game very strange. Now, again, like, it's either because like he's either in a spot where like he's not really playing the game much at all, just being super passive in the game, or he's making these like very questionable decisions, though most times they seem to work out for him. Whereas by him flipping against his entire Titan group, he does seem to find himself in with the rebels following this, and doesn't really have that much of a stink on him of being this person that's this flipper. Now, at the end of the day, again, it makes him a safe vote for the Titans to take out in this round, so it's not like he positioned himself particularly well, but again, I do find his game just kind of conflicting, even though I don't really agree with much of what he did on this season. Now, as a character, again, he was a fun character. He was a fun, likable presence for a lot of it, though I think a lot of that comes from the fact that he simply just didn't care about the game of Survivor and seemed to just take everything in jest and kind of make a mockery of the process at some points, but still overall was a pretty fun character on the show, though one I don't know how much game potential there really is with him. Now we're episode 18, where here we do start off with a lot of focus on Raymond, with him talking about how he didn't go with the people that he typically goes with, and he needs to look to the future, make big moves, which I wonder what this is going to lead up to, where we do follow this up with Carolyn talking about what's going on with Raymond as we see him huddled up in the hammock, where we get sympathetic music playing, only for us to cut to Raymond talking about now is the time to improve his resume, revealing that he's going to attempt to use his ultimate vote advantage, with this being the last time that he could pull it off. And his way of getting that through is through refusing food and water and companionship and pretending like the flip that happened the previous night made him feel so bad that he now wants to quit, enlisting the help of Ferris and later Kirby to help him pull this off. And this is an interesting plan here. Now, it was one that was a bit controversial, and straight up, I fully understand that, especially in light of Scott having previously quit over genuine concerns over his mental health. And for Raymond to pretend he has similar style of issues in order to get the entire tribe to vote him out, again, does feel icky. Now, again, straight up, I don't think that was intentional. I don't think this was some plot to manipulate the Scott situation to his benefit, but again, I do understand that point of view. But beyond that, I mean, like, really just this entire notion of going through this plan is obviously one that's extremely risky. Now, as I mentioned, again, Raymond's in this position where he does need to make moves and do things to earn respect from the jury, to where I think that kind of makes it a little bit more tolerable, especially this being the last time he can use it, to where at that point, yes, I think him making a move like this is a risk that, again, maybe is worth taking, but I think in most situations, this would just be idiotic for someone to even try to do something like this, as so much could go wrong. And while it works out for him, I still feel like it's a bigger risk than what's worth taking. But really, again, most of this episode is revolved around this plan. We really see very little talk that doesn't in some way involve Raymond wanting to quit. And we do obviously get a lot of focus on the performance aspect of it, which, I mean, I guess is supposed to be funny, though I personally just found it kind of boring, where it's really just us seeing the same shtick over and over again of Raymond going off on his own, while Ferris is gloating in confessional about how the plan is working and that him and Raymond should win Oscars. And again, just got so repetitive to me, where they literally do this 3 times over the course of this episode. And something also strange about this is that despite this being Raymond's big moment, Ferris really gets the bulk of the content for the two. Again, he gets double the amount of confessionals that Raymond does in this episode, which again was a strange aspect of all this as well. Now, the only non-related Raymond content we get in this episode does come before the reward challenge, where first up we do see Kitty revealing to her fellow Titans that she flipped, and then seemingly flips back, which makes you question what she flipped to begin with. It was dumb to flip to begin with. And while she is accepted back, obviously people trust her less than what they used to, but we also do see some content from V, who talks about not expecting that Alex would have played the idol on her, and that they now have a decent relationship. And what do you know? We get the reward challenge, a challenge that's perfectly suited for Alex, when it involves them having to go back and forth and collect coconuts. They shoot with a slingshot that they use to take down tiles, with this challenge having a social strategy aspect to it, of you having to take down tiles with names of the other players, and the last name standing wins, which again is a cool challenge on paper, especially for a reward challenge. It could potentially shake up some tribe dynamics, though something that became underwhelming about this challenge in particular is the fact that the slingshot in itself was something that most people had trouble shooting, where Alex was the only person that seemed to be able to consistently make shots here, to where he does easily win this challenge. And what do you know? He picks Val alongside Ferris and Kitty, which were random picks, with there really being no connective tissue between any of these people, which leads to the actual reward itself not having much game talk there outside of Ferris doing more to try to convince people to vote out Raymond. And that's for the immunity challenge. It ends up being an interesting challenge here. The one that has this 3-level maze they have to get a ball through, which I should also mention the fact that Raymond doesn't even try in either of these challenges, but here Kirby does end up winning this, leading to Raymond telling the entire tribe to just vote him out following this, with Ferris telling them to put the game on hold for the sake of Raymond and wants everybody to yell out something nice as they vote for him and wants it to be unanimous because I guess that's what Raymond wants, which all this should be so sus. Like, obviously, yes, this is unprecedented. This advantage that a unanimous vote will allow you to have the sole vote to eliminate. Also, even in terms of an idol, I feel like no one has really done this before, pretending to quit to try to get all the votes on them and then do it that way. So again, it is unprecedented, but I do feel like Ferris was super heavy-handed, especially with these later aspects of it, of really emphasizing how much the vote needs to be unanimous and telling them to yell something nice as they vote, essentially confirming to them how the vote is going to play out. But here we do learn that Raymond's target is Valeria, finally the person that would have gone home last time if he didn't flip. But this is where Valeria does start to get some content here, talking about how the easy vote for everybody would be Raymond. She has concerns about others having their own plans, with Val being tempted to take out a threat here in Rihanna, which I do think would have been the optimal move to make, especially if you do have the read that something is off with this Raymond situation, though obviously it didn't seem like anyone did think that way. Where we do see Mark shutting down this plan, saying that if they break up this plan, the jury will be upset, which again, I do think is a genuine concern to be had if Raymond was telling the truth, but Raymond isn't. But obviously, again, they don't know that. Like, it is insanity to me that not a single person splits this vote, because it would have been just something so easy to do. And I think, like, just in case it is a plan from Raymond and Ferris, just put a vote, potentially save yourself in case of an idol, or even if it isn't a plan, if someone else decides to play an idol, just protect yourself. Like, I feel like it's insanity to me that not a single person splits their vote in this situation. But before trial, we do get some last second content from Rihanna, with her being worried about Raymond as he's shown himself to be a weasel in the previous vote, to where this leads to Kirby and Rihanna considering taking out Raymond, where all they would need is, again, just to split one single vote and Raymond would go home, which they decide to not go through with, though we do hear Kirby talk about giving Rihanna her immunity necklace, which is a bold move here, one that obviously she does go through with, and I get why she does it here, though, one, obviously I don't think it ended up being necessary, and even beyond that, I do think it's obviously just very dangerous, where if there is actually this plan against Rihanna, by you giving the necklace to Rihanna, they could just easily just swap the vote onto you, something that we've seen done numerous times across this season of the plan switching at Tribal. Now again, I know it is less likely that this will happen if you give it to her at the last second, not give them that much time to talk, which I understand what she's doing here. I still feel like, again, it's not really worth the risk. But I will say this content did actually make me think for a second that Kirby could potentially be going home, especially because we get this final confessional from Raymond talking about how he wants to create chaos at Tribal, and it did make me think, like, what if he does end up switching his vote to Kirby at the last second? But obviously that doesn't go through, where you get the Tribal, where Kirby does end up giving the necklace to Rihanna secretly in a seemingly attempt to do it secretly, which I guess is to give the other people less time to plan around it, but again, people are going to find out anyway. But anyway, we get to the vote itself, where people are actually voting for Raymond and yelling out their voting confessionals, where obviously Raymond reveals his advantage, with Ferris acting like he wasn't in on it. And what do you know? Everyone ends up voting for Raymond, where he is the deciding vote, and he does end up voting out Valeria, which again was kind of what he said he would do. But this was a little bit of a shock from an Edgic perspective, where, I mean, again, in my mid-season power ranking, I had Valeria as the number one contender. I feel like Valeria was the number one contender for a lot of this season. Again, for me, her edit had been going downhill for the last few episodes, so I wasn't as shocked as I would have been at her going out here, but I think in general it is kind of shocking to see her go out this early. I would have more so expected her to be an endgame boot, if not even a losing finalist at this point, but her to actually be voted out the final 9 was pretty early in my point of view. But anyway, with that, we do lose Valeria. I do think Valeria is someone that did lead to some drama at points, did make for some funny confessionals, though, again, don't particularly like how she acted at points in the season. Again, like her very cold demeanor when insulting people at Tribal was not a good look. Like even just outside the personal ramifications of it, I think just socially, in terms of the game, it's terrible. I do feel like that's the type of stuff that would make it tough for you to win a jury vote. Even though straight up, I think Valeria probably was in a spot where she still did have the respect to probably win a jury vote. I do feel like her comments towards Caroline and Eileen were things that could lose you jury votes. And beyond that, again, I think she's a bit of a sloppy player. Obviously, her going all out and trying to get revenge for Viola was not ideal gameplay at that point. But I do think she's still a pretty notable figure from this season, to where I would not be shocked if we see Valeria again down the road. I would not be opposed to seeing Valeria again down the road. To where, while again, I disagree with some that actually she took on this season, I still think she is one of the more notable players from this season, to where I think she's a very likely returnee from this season. But now for episode 19, where we start off this episode with some focus on the Mark and Alex relationship, where Mark gets content being devastated at the Valeria vote, saying that his number one's been sent packing and now he's stuck with Alex. To where we see them talk about creating a boys alliance with Ferris and Raymond, with Ferris getting the gloat about how everybody now wants to work with him. But this ends up leading to this pretty interesting dynamic on this round, where again, we're at the final 8 in a position where we surprisingly have 4 groupings of 2, which is pretty unprecedented, where I can't even think of another final 8 situation in social strategy history where we have 4 very solidified duos in the game. I can think of situations where we have 3, but again, I do think 4 is pretty unprecedented. But with that, we do get a lot of content surrounding Kirby, with her talking about how much she loves waking up on the island and playing this game, not being ready for it to end, which straight up, I did think this was leading up to a Kirby vote, to where I spent a lot of this episode actually thinking that Kirby was on her way out, to where despite the bulk of Dodo content we get for Alex throughout this episode, which obviously in retrospect is setting him up for a fall in this episode, I very much thought of that as stuff to sink his jury chances, where he would be a losing finalist. To where, again, I very much thought Kirby was going home for a lot of this episode, especially when we get a lot of focus on her relationship with Ferris and how much it's changed over time. And we see this like argument between Alex and Kirby, to where we see them hashing out why they don't trust each other anymore. And we get the same argument over him being a floater and them talking about having to go after each other for the rest of the game. But it does lead to the reward challenge, where who would have guessed it? It's a physical challenge that Alex ends up winning, to where we do actually get a pretty interesting moment from this of Alex having enough water to finish the challenge, only to then put that water into Mark's bucket to allow him to go back to Mark and ask him for advice on who to pick, to which Mark tells him to pick Ferris and Caroline. Obviously, these numbers that they need to pull off this vote against Kirby, and we even see the others just stopping to even bother with the challenge to discuss who he's going to pick. And we get to his picks, to where he picks Rihanna and Kirby, going directly against Mark's plan and really just being the opposite of the plan, which is just really humorous that he asks Mark for advice just to not go through with any of it. But again, the reward ends up being a spa day, where again we get this Dodo content here for Alex of him saying that his goal here is to make Kirby and Rihanna trust him, and that his plan is to get them tipsy and give them a fake plan. And we get this like seductive music playing in the background. All this was very strange. Or even see him like fake campaigning to them while like shaving his chest in the shower. And it's like, what are we doing? But we do see Kirby pretending to buy into this, despite openly talking to the others about wanting to target Alex instead. Though back at camp, we do see Mark actually go to work here, where despite him being annoyed at Alex for not following with his plan, we do see him use this time to build relationships with Ferris and Raymond and organize this vote against the Kirby-Rihanna pairing, with Ferris wanting Rihanna out in particular, though Mark trying to get him to agree to take out Kirby, leading to Ferris saying that if Rihanna wins immunity, that he'll be willing to take out Kirby. Taking us to Immunity Challenge, where who would have guessed Rihanna wins immunity? Though it ends up being actually an interesting challenge here, it being the return of the final immunity challenge from Champs vs. Contenders 2. And we do get this great showdown at the end between Rihanna and Alex, with Alex having this pretty amazing recovery, where he just barely avoids getting into the water and ends up somehow getting back up, though he ends up losing anyway. But following this, we do see Alex being concerned, with him realizing that his campaigning at the spa was not effective, and realizing it was a mistake to take Rihanna and Kirby over just taking the guys, to which we get Rihanna openly saying that all he did is bring the girls even closer together to where they solidify the plan to vote Alex out. I'll always see Ferris talking to Mark and Alex about needing to pull over Caroline, as she hasn't done a single thing for her resume and needs a big move, which really comes out of left field, to where obviously we had seen that Caroline was being looked at as an emotional player, but it's very strange that Caroline was also perceived as someone that didn't really make a move in the game, considering she literally made one of the biggest moves in the early game and taking out Viola. But this is where we do see Ferris talking to Kirby, and they agree to vote for Alex, with again, the edit not really making it clear this is actually where Ferris is actually leaning, though I do feel like this was an active choice that he was always going to be voting Alex out over Kirby in this situation, which I do think is the right call for Ferris. Like, straight up, I spent a lot of this episode thinking that Ferris was going to vote out Kirby, and me thinking that was the incorrect call for him to make, as I do feel like getting rid of Kirby this early is getting rid of this pretty big shield for him in the game, to where I felt like the earliest he should have even gotten rid of Kirby is at the final 6, to where I did feel like final 8 here was just way too early, to where she's someone that would pretty much almost always be targeted over him. But really, again, we do get a lot of focus though on Alex, with him awkwardly trying to get into a conversation with Caroline, though she's spending a lot of time with Kitty. We see them go up to them and just not say anything because he doesn't trust Kitty with the plan. Though interestingly, throughout a lot of this situation where Caroline's supposedly a swing vote, we really get no confessionals from her about this plan, which in retrospect was very clearly a red flag that this was never going through, though I didn't really pick up on it until after the fact. But here we do see Mark saying that Alex is on a downward spiral and that he needs to keep him in check, which he doesn't do. Though we do see Alex being worried that the blind side's on him, something that the edit portrays it as if Alex wasn't going to go home throughout this round and that he really only blew up his game at Tribal, when I feel like clearly he was going home the entire time. To where, while again his actions at Tribal were not good and definitely blow up his game even more, I do feel like it was a situation where he was kind of screwed to begin with. But he does come into Tribal saying that he's going to make it his mission to get everyone to turn on Kirby. So here we do get a lot of bickering between Alex and Kirby over how the spa day went, and her calling him a floater once again, which leads to Alex kind of just blowing up everyone's games here, openly calling out Ferris for having come for Kirby, and also asking Ferris what has he done since the tribe swap, and that Kirby's making all of his moves, which makes no sense, as Ferris and Kirby weren't even working together until post-merge, and he ends up blindsiding her at the win a vote. But either way, we also see him proceed to berate Caroline, saying, what are you doing to win this game? And saying that she needs to make a move. Again, Rich coming from Alex, which is like, what has he really done in the game? Or again, he's tried to do things, but it's largely failed at pretty much anything he's ever tried to do. But really, this largely just comes off as Alex being a bit indignant here, just being upset that no one's really going along with his plan. Though through all this, we really see him blow up Kirby's game, very clearly calling out Kirby as the biggest threat on the board, which seems to escalate her threat moving forward in the game, with her constantly talked about as the number one jury threat from this point on. But either way, Alex is voted out here in a 6-2 vote, which again did surprise me at the time. I did actually think that Kirby was going home for a lot of this episode, but in retrospect, it should have been kind of obvious. But either way, we do lose Alex here, who was kind of a fun character. I mean, he was definitely this scrappy underdog figure that, again, at least tried to do things in the game. Now, again, his game is actually really bad, where he very rarely gets anything actually done throughout really the entire season, but I thought he was a fun presence on the show. I think character-wise, he kind of did remind me of someone like a David at points, just not as good at the game. So I guess you could also compare him to someone like a Reynold from Survivor Karamoan, and again, just him feeling like this underdog figure that could just never get his footing, though seemed to just be having fun pretty much most of the time. So all around, I did feel like he was a pretty good character for this season, someone I wouldn't be surprised to see come back down the road. But with that, we then get to episode 20. A relatively slow episode here, where right away we do get a lot of content surrounding Kirby, being concerned that she's now not under the radar, because I guess she was at a point. Though let's talk about how much Alex has put a target on her back, being worried it's going to ruin her and Rihanna's games. So I wonder what's going to happen here. But here we do see Kirby talking about needing to stick to the girls and get them to target Mark, where we do see Caroline talking about wanting Mark gone, saying that it's silly to not be thinking of your resume at this point, which ends up being a major focus for her moving forward. Anyway, this is where we get some focus on Ferris, where we do see Ferris having a conversation with Kirby Kirby revealing to him that she wants to go to the end of the game with him, wanting to beat the best at the end, which she confirms in confessional this is actually what she's thinking, which is kind of insane, where this definitely feels like the repercussions of her not being a massive fan of the show, and through that thinking beating the best actually means going to the end of that person, beating them in a jury vote, when in reality, like, you could beat them by just voting them out before that. Though, to be fair for Kirby, I do think she probably beats anybody on the board anyway. But this does lead to Ferris actually wanting to keep Kirby around, to where while we do see him and Raymond talk about future targets, and Raymond explicitly wanting to take Kirby out, we do see Ferris more so leaning towards wanting Mark out until Raymond's able to convince him otherwise. Which, I mean, straight up, again, like, for Ferris, I don't think this is the right time to get rid of Kirby, to where while it did seem like he would have potentially gone through with it during this round, I just simply don't think it was the right timing, as he just becomes the biggest target following her elimination. But despite that, I do feel like Ferris actually plays this pretty well here in getting the votes onto the Kirby and Rihanna side of things, where we just see Ferris talking about how he knows Kirby better than anybody and knows that she's into women empowerment, and she's probably pitched an all-women's alliance to Caroline, so he ends up using this knowledge against Kirby here, going to Caroline and pretending like Kirby told him about the alliance and saying that Caroline would be the one out next, which again is a pretty impressive proactive lie here. Again, I've always liked the concept of proactive lies in games like this, especially when not done in an overtly sloppy way, and I do feel like Ferris does it pretty effectively here, and it getting Caroline to want to go for Kirby instead of Mark during this round. Though with that, we do see Kirby being pretty aware of the fact that the votes are starting to shift onto her, to where we do see her catching Caroline in a lie and noticing the pitch of her voice change when she's doing so, leading to Kirby confronting Ferris at night and proceeding to make a deal with him for him to take her to Final Four in exchange for her letting Rhea go during this round. Which, again, for Ferris in particular, I actually don't think this is a bad position for him, to take Kirby towards the end game, position where she's not particularly good at endurance, also having her as this massive shield for you, to where she'll always be targeted ahead of you. Again, it's kind of a good deal for him, though this precise deal doesn't really amount to much, as we do get to the immunity challenge, which ends up being the typical Dominoes challenge, where Kirby says that she needs to win, and that she's been downplaying her comp ability, and what do you know, she wins the challenge. Where we just see her get emotional following this, which leads to her changing her mind on this re-plan, despite the fact that the re-plan's gonna go through anyway, where we see Ferris's group agreeing to vote out Rihanna, while Kirby ends up going back on it now wanting Mark out instead and campaigns against him. Again, clearly Rhea was going home this entire time, but there being a lot of talk around how much of a threat she'll be at the final immunity challenge, which seemed to be a commonly talked about thing on this season, about how the final immunity challenge is going to be endurance and you need to get rid of the endurance threats before then, which was an interesting addition to the meta here. Though again, the lead up to Tribal here ends up being pretty mundane, with Caroline being set up as a swing, though clearly we knew where this vote was going, where we get the Tribal, and despite Kirby doing some campaigning there and asking Kitty if they're good right before the vote and trying to get Ferris back on board voting out Mark, it still ends up being a 5-2 Rihanna vote, which was kind of mundane. But with that, we do lose Rihanna, who straight up is one of the more bland personalities on this season. I don't really feel like she brought much entertainment to the show, though I think she fulfilled her role well enough, kind of being this nonchalant sidekick to Kirby, while also having some humorous threads in her own story, particularly around her constantly voting for Mark, which ends up ruining plans left and right, with her having accidentally sent home her own allies multiple times because of that. To where, considering how bland of a personality she seems to be, she still brought something to the table on this season, which is kind of why this season's as good as it is, that even someone like Rihanna, who shouldn't be interesting on the show, still had something to do here, to where she doesn't end up being a complete dud by the end of it. But with that, we then get to episode 21, where obviously we get Kirby's reaction to the Rihanna vote, with her now knowing that she's in danger, to where we see her going out looking for an idol, to where we do see her still wanting to work with Ferris, to where Ferris goes to follow her idol hunting, only for Mark to pick up on the fact that they could potentially be working back together, with him telling Kitty to go follow them as well, leading to some awkwardness between Kirby and Kitty, with Kitty having obviously lied to Kirby during the previous vote, to where Kirby now says that Kitty is the biggest liar in the game, I guess, and ends up obviously targeting her, which made it pretty clear where this this episode was going, especially considering how Kitty had the quietest edit on the board at this point, to where she didn't really seem like someone that primed to make the tail end of the game. But we again do see Kirby really using this notion that she can't win final immunity to her benefit and saying that's the reason to keep me around. Although Kitty responds to that by saying that I think I can beat anybody in endurance. Which, why are you saying that when you know that's a reason why people are getting voted out? But whatever. Again, despite all this idol hunting that we see here from Kirby, she doesn't end up finding it, but instead Caroline ends up finding the idol. In a situation where I'm surprised there even was an idol to find. Like, why are we having 2 idols here at the final 6? That seems a little bit overboard to introduce one at this point. But with that, we do have Caroline getting propped up in the edit and saying that this is the turning point for her and she needs to think about her resume. Now, she could be the person that sends someone home, which felt like either a moment that was really going to boost her edit or one that was going to completely sink it, with it obviously ending up being the latter. But we do get to the Mewtwo Challenge, which ends up being another stacking competition, which was also boring, but Kirby wins it once again, leading to Mark initially thinking that he's potentially in danger here, though we do then get Kirby and Ferris both saying that they should vote out Kitty instead, with her again being good at endurance in the final immunity challenge, which, mixing down the fact that she's obviously close to Caroline, like, it is actually a pretty decent target for them at this point, which Mark ends up getting on board with this plan, as obviously to him it's either him or her. So this is where we do get Caroline talking about wanting to make her big move. So initially it seemed like her big move was just to vote out Mark, to where we do see her and Kitty agree to vote out Mark, and her talking about wanting to get her revenge, or then we see her go to Kirby and Ferris and tell them to vote for Mark, with both of them agreeing to it, despite the fact that Kirby didn't really even seem on board. But this is where we see Caroline being confident that everyone's gonna vote Mark, and then reveals that her plan is to actually play her idol on Mark and use that to blindside Ferris. A great move on paper, obviously Ferris being a massive threat in the game, someone that's dominated a lot of the game and has an idol in his pocket, but that's one of the issues with this plan, the fact that he does have an idol in his pocket, and at the point where you play the idol on someone that he knows gained the majority of votes, why wouldn't he just play his idol at that point? So just inherently, why vote for Ferris instead of Raymond? Obviously Ferris is a juicier target, but the Raymond vote's more likely to go through. Though with that, I guess I should also mention the fact that how does Ferris still have his idol at this point? It's kind of insane that they let him skate by this far into the game with the idol still in his pocket, despite how big of a threat he is. But beyond that, obviously another major issue with this plan is the fact that Caroline decides to keep all of this secret, which obviously she's doing so to try to make it her move and try to gain more points for her resume. But again, it's just a plan that is just pretty half-baked, to where while we do see her go to Mark and tell Mark to vote for Ferris, he has no real incentive to stick to that plan when he knows that they don't have enough for the majority and he doesn't know that an idol is involved. And beyond that, we also see Caroline not tell Kitty anything as well, which, to be fair, obviously Kitty has been prone to leak plans and that could have messed things up as well. But I do think Caroline for sure should have at least looped in Mark into this plan, but really just felt like a plan that was kind of based around a lot of bad reads here and her not realizing that the vote was actually on Kitty instead of Mark, which again, had she told Mark, she would have been able to figure that out and they would have actually been able to make a big move together. Where instead, this move ends up just making her look even worse with her failing at what she's trying to do. So despite that, we do get some pretty overconfident Ferris content, clearly trying to make you think like this plan could go through, despite the fact that it was pretty clear that his side of things were going to vote for Kitty over Mark, or that just made all of that plan pretty null anyway, to where while we do see them at a point talk about voting for Mark, we never really got reasons why that is the case. While with Kitty, we got a lot more justification for why they're voting out Kitty, which made it more clear that it was going to be Kitty. Where we get the trial where obviously at that point, I felt like it was pretty clear what was going to happen here, especially with us getting this focus on Kitty, with her seeming to be set up for a fall, to where we do see Kitty ending up voting for Mark, while Caroline ends up voting for Ferris and proceeds to play her idol on Mark, only for one Mark vote to get nullified, Caroline be the only Ferris vote, and the rest of the votes to end up being on Kitty, which again just kind of wastes this idol in this situation. And again, just a worse look for Caroline, the fact that her own closest ally goes home and around where she ends up playing an idol on her biggest enemy in the game. But with that, we do lose Kitty, and Kitty was again another one of the bigger duds on this season, someone that didn't really bring much entertainment to the show, though it wasn't a complete dud. I mean, it was kind of humorous at how bad of a liar she was, and she did make some really strange strategic decisions that were at least interesting to see. Now overall, overall, again, like, she wasn't that prominent in the edit. She is one of the most under-edited players on this entire season, but she does seem like a somewhat competent player. I mean, she does seem to be very good socially, at least. I mean, she seemed to be very good at building these one-on-one bonds on her initial tribe and even at the swap with Rihanna and Sarah, to where there definitely seems to be some merit to her game, though just as a whole, she seems to be a bit of a messy player strategically, to where that kind of sunk most of her chances anyway. But now for episode 22, where here we do set it off with some pretty clear dynamics here, where Ferris talks about feeling confident, being in the majority with an idol, with him obviously being safe no matter what at this point, though ends up talking about how Mark is his next target. And nothing can go wrong unless someone finds an idol, leading to us seeing talk from Mark and Caroline. So they're clearly on the minority at this point, though they are targeting Kirby, as expected, though this is where we see them go on an idol hunt, to where we actually do see a pretty impressive plan be put together here by Ferris, to where when watching them, he concocts this plan of realizing the fact that Raymond is obviously in danger at this point, with him wanting to protect him. He decides to plant a fake idol using the remains of the second idol he found, to where he can fake that Raymond had found the idol. To where we see them go through this plan and Raymond finding it right in front of Mark and Caroline, to which Ferris ends up openly calling him out for it, which felt weird straight up. I mean, while obviously this plan does work and we do see Mark and Caroline fully buy into this and talk about how they can't even vote for Raymond anymore, I feel like the acting here was not great, and the fact that Ferris is like pointing this out to Caroline and Mark should have made it obvious that this was fake, as why would Ferris want them to know that Raymond had an idol? But either way, this does lead to content from Mark talking about how he's feeling pressure now and he needs to win immunity, and who would have guessed that we get to the immunity challenge where Mark wins immunity. Again, when Mark wins here, we do interestingly get this very somber music playing, with us seeing Ferris being devastated, and again, it was a weird portrayal of this scene where Mark is extremely emotional, extremely happy at his immunity win, only for us to more so be focusing on Ferris, which did start this change in my trajectory of where I thought this season was going. That didn't really solidify until the following episode, with Ferris clearly coming off as this more sympathetic figure that we're supposed to be rooting for, over Mark, who is more so being portrayed as this obstacle for him at this point, though, and that position didn't really solidify until the following episode. But here you see Ferris talking about how he feels defeated and how he's always close to winning a challenge, but not close enough, which I wonder if that'll matter down the road. But obviously this vote ends up being this dilemma over Kirby or Caroline, where Mark has immunity, Ferris has his idol, Raymond is presumed to have an idol, so it really just comes down to those two. And it obviously is this big choice here, where Kirby is someone that obviously takes Ferris to 2, who probably beats him at the end, but is also this big shield for him, to where as long as Kirby is in the game, no one is really coming for Ferris. Oh, Caroline is someone that probably doesn't take Ferris to the end, and obviously has this connection to Mark, to where they'll probably take each other, and could tie the numbers at 4, and through taking Caroline further in the game, it essentially means that he's going to need to win out moving forward. Again, at least win a fire making challenge at 4, and more than likely win final immunity at 3, though to be fair, I don't even know if they knew that it was going to be a final 2 in this season. But obviously through the Caroline path, though, it makes it easier for him to win, and now giving him more options to win, where obviously with Kirby in the game, that takes away a potential option for him to win the game. While with Caroline, he can beat Caroline, he probably beats Raymond, he has a shot against Mark. So again, I definitely understand this dilemma here. I personally at the time would have sided towards keeping Kirby around. I do think keeping Kirby secures his spot at the end a lot better, where again, at least he could have fought against Kirby, though I understand why he makes the move he makes. In this position, to fair, it does definitely work out for him. Though here we do see Kirby say that if she's gone, then Ferris is next, that Mark and Caroline are the final 2, which to be fair, at this time, I did take for face value. I did actually think that was what was going to happen. Though obviously in retrospect, her saying that openly kind of made it too obvious that was going to happen, to where it should have been clear that wasn't going to happen. But this does lead to Kirby end up asking Ferris to play the idol on her, essentially setting this up as, again, it is solely Ferris's decision on whether or not Kirby stays. If he really wants her to stay, he could just play her idol on her in this situation. Though clearly Ferris didn't really seem to be on board with this, to where while the edit does seem like this was an actual practicality, the way he reacts to this is in a way that would have made me pretty confident he was never going to use it. And the fact that he says, oh, that idea didn't even come through his head, and he still needs to think of all the possible scenarios. So while Kirby does seem to come out of this thinking that Ferris will play his idol on her, that's not really the vibe I got from this. But through this, we do see Ferris putting in a lot of legwork to secure his position moving forward. We do see him talk to Mark, and they proceed to make a final 3 deal, to where Mark again reiterates all he needs to do is win final immunity and take Caroline to the end, and then he'll win, which should have made it obvious that wasn't happening. All we'll see Ferris Ferris then go to Caroline and make the same exact deal. Though in this one, proceed to make her agree to vote out Mark at Final Four, which obviously him making the exact same deal of both Mark and Caroline is sloppy play, though again, like, what's the worst case scenario? As no matter what, they need Kirby out here anyway, and he has an idol, and even beyond this, again, he's at least has the numbers to tie, so none of this really matters anyway. But again, we get the tribal, where Ferris does put the idol around his neck, and we do get some whispering here from Ferris and Raymond, where Ferris clearly seems to still consider taking Kirby further in the game, while Raymond is more adamant in taking Kirby out, something that, again, didn't really get that focused on the show. But Ferris ends up playing his idol here and revealing the big plan about the fake idol as well. He proceeds to give this big speech about how Kirby's fate lies with his idol, and we get this emotional music playing, which, to be fair, is a pretty fitting farewell to their relationship, obviously the main storyline of this season. And for this to be the moment where he finally lands his shot and gets Kirby out of the game is a pretty satisfying moment there. But with that, obviously, we lose Kirby, who was such a massive presence on this season, to where, well, again, I disagreed with certain decisions she made in the game, particularly early on. I do feel like as a whole, Kirby is a very impressive player. I mean, she's someone that I would have a lot of faith in most given seasons, to where she just seems like a perfectly well-rounded player for Australian Survivor if she's able to pick up the strategy a bit better next time, as I feel very confident we'll see her again anyway. But as a TV presence, she was fine. I mean, again, I think her rivalry with Ferris definitely added to her personality on the show, to where I think outside that, she does come off kind of Sarah Lacina-y to me. And again, this figure that is very charismatic to the people around her on the island, though doesn't really pop as a TV character as much, though again, isn't bad either. I mean, her openness to get into confrontations at Tribal is really interesting. She still had some cutting confessionals, so it's not like she's even bad TV in that light, but I do look at her more so as a very impressive player, and one that obviously just had a massive role on this season, to where her rivalry with Ferris is definitely one of the main things I take away from this season. But with that, we then get to episode 23, the Final Four episode, where again, we do start off with Mark and Caroline celebrating how they did it, only for us to cut to Ferris being quiet and emotional, clearly setting up Ferris as the rootable underdog at this point. Though here he does say he made the decision to back himself and got rid of Kirby, which he does proceed to say a lot in this endgame stretch about how he's backing himself, which, again, isn't backing yourself going to the end with Kirby and backing up your game? I guess it could be interpreted either way, but again, I did find this phrasing of how he's backing himself to be kind of strange. But either way, Mark does say that the path to the end is fully set up for him, and that him and Caroline are now working together to get to the final two, and that he thinks the jury likes him more. Again, just kind of making it too obvious that he would win if he got to the end. Oh, we see Mark and Ferris reconfirm their final three, with Mark correctly pointing out that he doesn't think that Ferris will actually go through with it, and talks about how he needs to win immunity so he can have the choice of who to take out. Well, obviously we see Ferris confirm that, talking about how his main loyalty is to Raymond, that his plan is to betray Mark, saying that worst case scenario is Mark wins immunity. Or what do you know, we get to the immunity challenge, where once again Mark beats Ferris at the final portion of the challenge, to where again we once again get this very emotional music playing, with a lot of focus on how disappointed Ferris is, and this somber music, which again, this was the point where I fully turned on Mark in the edit, to where, again, up to this point, I had very much thought Mark was winning this season. I did think Mark's edit was pretty spotless for a lot of the season, to where in points where he played terribly, the edit was still giving him so much credit for those moves. And we constantly got these confessionals about how things are good for him in the game, despite them not really actually being that good practically. But again, it very much felt like the edit was very much protecting Mark. Though I think it is this episode that really made it very clear that Ferris was being set up to win, with Mark kind of being this final foil for Ferris instead. So where this episode did change the overall trajectory of where I thought this season was going, which is for the better anyway, as I would have rather had Ferris win than Mark anyway. But either way, with this immunity challenge, it does end up being confirmed to be the second to last immunity challenge, essentially confirming a final two on this season, which was nice to see back, especially considering the fact that I very much did not think we were going to get a final two ever again on Australian Survivor. Again, I did feel like Australian Survivor was a show that constantly tried to make a final three happen, though had unlucky circumstances stop them from being able to do so, where both All-Stars and Brains vs. Brawn had medevacs that stop those situations from happening. And obviously we had a final 3 in both Blood vs. Water and Heroes vs. Villains, though here again to see a final 2 back was very refreshing, especially as it also meant that we got no non-elimination episodes in the post-merge, which was also shocking to see. So again, it feels like the show going in the right direction of producers actually kind of knowing what they're doing in the situation, where again, outside of episode 10, I do like the way that the season ended up being formatted, with it kind of being the optimal format for an Australian Survivor season. But again, beyond this, again, we got a lot of focus on Ferris, talking about how this is the worst possible outcome, and that he's disappointed in himself, and that he let people down, and that hurts so much that he sent Kirby home, and now he thinks that he took someone's spot, and all this obviously being to make him a more sympathetic figure. But I did think at the time maybe this would lead to him sacrificing his game for Raymond, though obviously that doesn't end up being the case. But here we do see Mark and Caroline talk about how they are going to be voting for Raymond, where Mark tells Caroline that he thinks that she's making fire tonight, which is an idea that doesn't get really followed up on this episode, though very clearly that did influence where this vote was going, where obviously Ferris is the bigger threat all around. We hear both Mark and Caroline talk about that fact. However, obviously a thing that factored in here was the fact that Raymond was more likely to lose at a fire-making challenge, where it did seem like Ferris was primed to win a fire-making challenge if he was in one, to where obviously they knew Caroline was getting votes, to where Caroline would be more likely to beat Raymond in a fire-making challenge, to where it did seem like that was the reason why they voted for Raymond here, which to be fair is the correct call to make in this position. But this is where we see Mark and Caroline finally talk about their final 3 deals with Ferris, realizing that he made the same deal to both of them, obviously leading to this plan of strong-arming Ferris into voting out Raymond, which is obviously another benefit of voting out Raymond as well, is that you could potentially get Ferris to turn on him. Though obviously Ferris ends up worrying about what if they're not voting for Raymond and that he accidentally causes a 2-1-1, which really just sums up the situation. The fact that Ferris should never be voting for Raymond here, where if he knows for sure that Raymond is with him, there's never really a reason for him to not be voting for Caroline in this position, as that just risks him being taken out in that style of vote. But again, this leads to us getting more of this villainous content for Mark on the way to Tribal, of him talking about how he knows that Ferris is lying and that he wants to see Ferris struggle and wants to embarrass him in front of the jury, taking us to Tribal, to where you do get Mark just calling out Ferris for making these final 3 deals and calls him out for lying, saying that you're lying to somebody, which is like, I mean, yeah, it's you. And again, this was overall just a pretty bad look for Mark, especially with Raymond calling him out for him trying to demean Ferris, which just further sunk his edit for me. But with that, we do get to the vote itself with 10 minutes left in the episode, so I wonder what's going to happen here, where we obviously get a 2-2 vote between Caroline and Ferris, where we get the fire-making challenge, which was just kind of sad to see, where obviously things go wrong for Ferris once again, where despite him giving Raymond advice constantly throughout the challenge, Raymond struggles to even set up his fire, with his pile just getting knocked over constantly, while Caroline gets fire right away and ends up easily winning, taking out Raymond, where Raymond is a player that I just wish we got to see more of on the show. Like, Raymond seems like an all-time great character in most aspects, yet we just for some reason didn't see him, which is so strange. Where the content we did get from Raymond on this season was very strong, and we got this really jovial tone from him, with him making these quips left and right that were all really humorous, and him just having this really bizarre personality that was really entertaining to see when we saw it. But again, I just find it strange how under-edited he was, considering how big of a character he was, and especially in the preseason, where I remember even there, JLP was talking about how his favorite dynamic on the season was the Ferris and Raymond dynamic, and for us to not even really see much of Raymond on this season was just very strange. And obviously that's because Ferris got a lot of the content for the 2, though again, you would think that Raymond just being this incredible character would have been enough to give him some more screen time than what he actually had, where again, most of his screen time came from the week where he got most of the votes onto him, and even then Ferris got more content than Raymond in that situation. So again, Raymond seemed to be an incredible character we just didn't see, though from a player standpoint, he did seem to be a bit lacking. I mean, again, he was a consistent player. He actually has one of the best voting records across the season, though at the same time, he did seem to not have this killer instinct in the game. He didn't seem to be willing to cut Ferris, which is something I think he needed to do if he wanted to win the game. While he is a very constant presence in this season, again, did make moves individually at points. Obviously, he did move to take out Valeria. He flips to take out Jaden. Again, he made these more independent moves, though I don't know if it would have been enough to win at the end. Though again, he did seem to be well liked, and just in general, like, does seem to be a competent player, though one that I just wish he had more of a killer instinct to really go even beyond that. But really, I mean, at the end of the day, I think Raymond will be more so remembered for as a character anyway. Or again, he ends up being a really fun presence on this season. But with that, we then get to the finale, starting it off with the final 3 round, where it obviously all starts off with these typical game recaps of us going to each player as we prepare for the immunity challenge. Where again, Ferris gets a lot of focus here, talking about how he's lost everything and that he's backed himself, but has come short when it comes to challenges, and that Mark is tough to beat, but he's gonna dig deep and make the people back home proud. Obviously, again, this content that was feeling like this setup to him going on the win, with Mark and Caroline feeling like these foils for him. But they clearly talk about voting out Ferris and needing him to not win immunity. So I wonder what's gonna happen here, where we get to the final immunity challenge, which ends up being a really cool one here. Obviously, Australian Survivors kept with the endurance challenges as the final immunity challenges, and this was another torture contraption here of this Ferris wheel that had them standing on these small pegs, and it would turn over time and they would have the transition. Again, a really cool challenge here. Obviously, with like most Australian Survivor finales, we then got to break up the pacing by adding in the loved ones, where again, that was mostly boring, but the challenge itself ends up being again really fun to watch here. We're seeing Mark really struggling for a while and putting in a good effort, though, being the first to drop, and we see Caroline seemingly doing very well until the final peg. It's at that point where she drops, so where Ferris wins final immunity here. Again, essentially cementing his win at this point. Again, very clear he was going to win the game, very clear he was going to vote out Mark. There was no real suspense, even though the edit tried to make it seem like there was, where Mark does talk about how he's going to influence Ferris to keep him in the game, to get the tribal. Or again, he does kind of try, and we see both Mark and Caroline kind of suck up to Ferris in this situation, with Mark constantly complimenting him and talking up Caroline's chances of winning the game, which I don't think anyone really believed. Now, we'll be remiss to not go through his tribal and not talk about what is probably one of my favorite character moments of this season at this point, which is when we get to tribal and see the jury members coming in. We see Raymond just getting super excited and yelling out in glee, and seeing Ferris with the immunity necklace, which is a nice touching moment there. But anyway, we get to the vote where obviously Mark gets voted out here. And again, Mark was just such a weird presence on this season, where again, I spent a lot of the season thinking that he was going to win. I did feel like Mark's edit felt like a pretty spotless Australian Survivor winner edit of someone that's not the main character of the season, where again, typically the main character of Australian Survivor seasons don't win. The only exception is David, but again, that was an all-star season, and one where David got like double the confessionals of anyone else on the season. So again, it felt like Ferris was a bit too prominent to win in my eyes. So again, I felt like Mark had the perfect amount of content to win it, while also being someone that was propped up in edit, someone that was clearly protected by the edit. However, I think now in retrospect, obviously it looks more so like this was an edit set up for him being this final boss for Ferris. And to be fair, I would rather have that. I am much more happy with the outcome that we got than Mark winning the game. Is again, I don't think Mark's game is great. I mean, he's not a bad player. I mean, again, I think he has a lot of skills for the game. Again, he seems to be very good socially. He is a very strategic person. Yeah, I definitely qualm with some decisions he made at points, but yeah, he does end up playing a big role in getting the Titans back together after the merge. He again gets the Jaden vote to go through. He was very well positioned early on in the game, though again, I think his post-swap game is very messy and really should have been game ending for him there. And even towards the end game, he was kind of just scraping by. So obviously he was in a position to win. Again, had he won final immunity, he would have won the game. He would have taken Caroline. I think he would have easily won. Even against Ferris, I think he would have had a shot. I think it definitely would have been somewhat close. But Mark, again, is an interesting character in that light, in the sense that while I don't agree with a lot of the decisions he made throughout the game, he does come very close to winning, and is someone I do look at as a pretty solid player. Now, as a TV presence, he was just kind of fine for me. He's someone that didn't really pop in my eyes, to where his constant talk about being a former diplomat was just kind of annoying, and right outside that, he just kind of seemed like a game bot outside the points that he was going for revenge, which was all kind of stupid as well, where he didn't really do much for me as a character on this season, especially over the likes of the Kirbys, the Ferrises, the Raymonds of the world, even Caroline, where again, I end up being kind of happy he didn't win, as again, that would have been kind of a bland outcome to the season, though it is one I did think we were actually getting. So again, the fact that he didn't end up winning this season by the end of it was kind of shocking to me. But with that, we then get to the final 2, where obviously it is now Ferris versus Caroline, where it is pretty clear that Ferris is going to win. Though we do get the typical content from the final day of them getting breakfast and talking about their experiences, with Ferris again getting to talk about having grown through this experience and having been able to represent his community. And we see the shot of him praying on the shore, which was all a pretty nice moment. But we get the final tribal, which I will say the editing of it was very strange, as if it was very clearly trying to keep you thinking that Caroline could actually win when it was pretty clear that she couldn't. And through that, we have both of the finalists being scolded and neither performing particularly well, to where, again, all this was just kind of strange in the way this was portrayed. But we do have Val talking about how she still hasn't made a decision. It's going to be hard for the jury, with her saying that Ferris's game isn't enough and she hasn't seen a strategic move from him. It says the same with Caroline, which is like, what are you talking about? Now, again, I do think there is this interesting aspect of the season, the fact that the season was so dynamic that it becomes very tough for a single person to claim any individual move. But to think that Ferris made no moves is kind of insane to me. And same thing with Caroline, when Caroline literally took out Viola, which is a move that Valeria was so upset over for her entire game. So again, the fact that she talks about how they didn't make any moves was kind of ridiculous to me. But we do have Rhianna calling out Caroline for not including her in her plans, and talks about how she went against her morals to get to the end, which I didn't even understand this. This just all seemed really stupid to me. And obviously we have Val calling out her poor social game as well, and she ends up being asked to name a move she made in the end game, to which she mentions her failed final six move, which was not a good answer. For overall, it felt very clear the jury was not on her side. But again, they were pretty harsh on Ferris as well, where we see Ferris being called out for not listening to his alliance's advice, and proceed to see him say that his best move in the game was giving Alex the idol, which was a questionable answer there. We also see Kirby call him out for not playing the game with courage, which was a strange comment as well, though we do see him perform pretty well at the tail end, where he does really talk through what he was doing with the idol and reveals the full scope of his fake idol plan, the final five, which does seem to quell a lot of this notion that he didn't make any moves. So where we get to the actual vote itself, where obviously the family has to come out because they're still doing this. There again, I still hate it. Again, it still breaks up the pacing of the winner reveal, where we're asking the family members questions, which is like, I don't care. But either way, it's a unanimous Ferris vote. Who would have guessed? I'm too fair. I was actually kind of surprised at the fact that Kitty didn't vote for Caroline, though it did seem like she voted for Ferris because of him needing the money more, so that's kind of whatever. But again, not really shocked at the other votes, though. For Ferris winning this season is an incredible outcome. It's one that, again, surprised me, again, as a person that follows the Edgic of Australian Survivor. Ferris winning here, despite being such a main character on the season, is very abnormal. It is a situation that's really only happened before with David, and even then there were extenuating circumstances that made it clear why he would win that season. I feel like with Ferris, him winning was such a shock just due to how out in front he was. Again, it very much felt like even Kirby had more of a traditional Australian Survivor winner edit than Ferris, despite her not being in the first 2 episodes of the show. So again, Ferris was so out in front. He had no content in the merge episode, which is also pretty bad. He was shown pretty negatively at points. His strategy was also criticized at points, to where, again, like, Ferris's winning edit is kind of strange, even though, again, from a more casual standpoint, people think this is an obvious outcome. I think for people that don't follow Edgic, again, Ferris was the obvious winner the entire time because he was so out in front. But again, that's not the way Australian Survivor typically edits, to where usually the secondary or third most prominent character ends up winning the season, not typically the most prominent character, to where, again, that definitely did surprise me that Ferris won. But again, I'm very happy that Ferris won. I do very much like Ferris on this season. I do think Ferris plays a very impressive game to get to the end as well, to where, again, I am very satisfied with this outcome, definitely more so than the Mark outcome that I thought we were actually going to get for a lot of the season, to where really I feel like Ferris's win here just further solidifies this season as one of the best the show has had, with this just being an incredible storyline to wrap up the season. But with that, let's wrap up the video talking about the finalists, starting it off with Caroline. And Caroline is an interesting player on this season in the sense that I think she plays a very impressive game for the first half of the season. I think she plays a game where she's really in control of most of what's going on, which is really refreshing to see from this older woman archetype that we don't really see be in this power position the way that she was in many cases. Though despite that, I do understand why she loses at the end. Again, it does obviously have tinges of biases against older women that we typically see on these sort of shows, but even beyond that, I do think she did seem to be pretty bad socially with people outside of her core group. She also did fail at making some pretty big moves at the end that did taint her jury perception as well. Where, again, I understand why she loses at the end, though I do think she plays a mostly impressive game. So again, had she won the game from a pure gameplay perspective, I would not have been opposed at that. Though, again, against Ferris, I do think Ferris played a better game for the most part, even though I don't think it's as big of a difference as people would like to claim. Again, I do very much respect Caroline's game on this season, and I liked her as a character as well. Like, I thought it was interesting to see her really running the show, and then when she wasn't, to see her play from the bottom, and she had these pretty cutting confessionals at points. Again, I liked how much she was willing to play into this villainous role, and had these fun voting confessionals where, while again, some of them didn't come off as cringy, I still feel like the fact that she was at least trying to be this villainous figure was fun to see. Where overall, I'm very happy with Caroline's role in this season. I did, again, very much appreciate the game she played. And also, I fully understand why she does lose the game, where really I feel like she ended up having a pretty satisfying role on this season. And finally, let's talk about the winner of the season in Ferris, who, again, I'm very happy won this season. I mean, as I mentioned before, I do think Ferris was pretty much the optimal outcome for this season, where obviously he was the main character of the season. He was someone that so hyped up in the edit. I mean, his dynamic with Kirby ends up being the major storyline of this season, and along with that, he ends up playing a pretty impressive game, to where while I definitely qualm with certain decisions that he makes at points, and he also is on the bottom throughout the entire post-swap phase of the game, I do think a lot of his game is very impressive. I think the fact that he was able to keep his idol all the way to Final 5 with no one coming after him is pretty impressive, along with the fact that he kept Kirby around as a shield for as long as he did is pretty impressive as well, where Ferris's threat management is an extremely impressive aspect of his game, something that is very integral for Australian Survivor in particular, which is such a long game. And beyond that, again, obviously he made some pretty big moves. Again, he was one of the leaders in the vote against PETA. He had the votes organized to take out Rihanna. He was the one to bring up the split vote plan to take out Charles. He organized the votes against Winna. He flipped the votes at the last second to take out Eden. He was involved in Raymond taking out Valeria. He obviously had the fake idol plan to Final 5 to get Mark and Caroline to stop looking for the idol. Like, he has so many impressive aspects of his game. For all around, I just find him a very satisfying winner here, both from a gameplay front and an entertainment front, to where really just a perfect outcome for this season, to where even beyond that, I do look at Ferris coming out of this as one of the better winners of the show, to where, again, while I haven't really solidified my updated winner ranking that I will be doing at some point down the road, I do think it's kind of a debate for Ferris between 2 or 3 on the winner ranking right now for Australian Survivor, to where I just think the way he navigates through the game is very impressive, despite the fact that there are definitely issues to be had here and there. So I think it'll also be interesting to see where he lands as a player as well, to where, again, I will be ranking every Australian Survivor player at some point down the road, where at this point I can see definitely an argument for him being at least a top 5 player of the show, to where overall Ferris's run this season ended up very much impressed me by the end, even though, again, there were definitely some rocky points here and there, but overall a very satisfying winner to this season. But with that, that is the entire season of Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels, a season that is way better than it had any right to be. Again, Australian Survivor is a show that I had very much criticized for a lot of its run. I do think the show had been harmed by its extended runtime and its extensive bloat, alongside the fact that it would just repeat the same content from the same characters over and over again, and mixing out the non-eliminations. It was just simply a product that I did not think was as good as the American counterpart. Yeah, I think with this season and how focused of the experience ended up being outside of episode 10, and it being just a natural game of Survivor, again, a pretty by-the-number season with only 2 non-elimination episodes, both of which having twists that were not particularly egregious, and a pretty untainted post-merge, no non-eliminations from that point on. And again, just such a great cast. Again, a surprisingly good cast for Australian Survivor, with the only few duds going out relatively early on in the game. Mixing that with the fact that we had some incredible storylines on this season, again, some great rivalries from the likes of Ferris and Kirby, from Caroline and Mark. We had some of the most dynamic gameplay we had ever seen, with constantly shifting alliances, with alliances very rarely sticking for beyond a vote in the post-merge until the very end of the game. And beyond that, feeling like there was very few dud episodes on this season, to where even the worst episode of this season is probably better than a good chunk of episodes from most other seasons. So where Australian Survivor Titans vs. Rebels is an incredible season of the show, by far my new favorite Australian Survivor season by quite a bit. But I think this also stands up against most US seasons, where I've also been openly talking about how I don't think most international seasons stand up to the best seasons of the US show. I think this one is up there. Now, again, it's not in my upper echelon. It's not alongside the US Heroes vs. Villains or Cagayan's or David vs. Goliath or Micronesia's, but again, I think this is on par with something like San Juan del Sur, which is a very highly ranked season for me. Again, I don't think it's a top 5 season globally, but it's definitely a top 10. So again, the fact that we got that from a Australian Survivor season in the modern day is insane to me, to where really this season impressed me in almost every single facet, with it somehow being one of the best seasons I've ever watched. But with that, again, that is my review for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels. Now moving forward, I will be doing my player ranking that I always do, obviously, where that should be the next video coming out. And beyond that, obviously, we got a lot of other shows going on. Again, Survivor 46 is going currently going on. I'll also do the mid-season power ranking of that, and then later review and player ranking of that. Obviously, we got BB Can 12. We have Amazing Race, Challenge All-Stars 4s coming up, to where I'll be doing videos on those things. Obviously, beyond that, obviously, going to continue on with the typical content I do on the channel. And got a couple Australian Survivor videos coming up before next season. Next season, season 10, and obviously, I have a big video plan for following that season as well, to where, again, got a lot coming up down the road. But for now, those are my thoughts on Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels. Thank you for watching.